Chapter 1290. Qin Guang didn't die. He was just completely shattered. His body and soul had completely fused with the Holy Grail. Of course, in the eyes of those who wanted him dead, he was really dead. He had turned from a complete soul into an artifact spirit. There was no difference between being alive and being dead. To the existences in the God realm who wanted him dead, the next step would be to wait for the 3,000 planes in the heavenly Holy Grail, especially the 9 great unique worlds, to evolve on their own from nothing to something, from prosperity to decline, and finally to slowly walk towards destruction. The Protoss had a lifespan, so did the planes. However, to ordinary life forms, the lifespan of a plane was so long that it was almost eternal. But to the gods of the endless divine realm, especially the god emperors and main gods at the very top of the pyramid, even the most complete plane, as long as it wasn't the endless divine realm, the birth and destruction of these worlds were nothing more than a passing matter. Now that the heavenly grail had evolved into a complete world and left the endless divine realm, it had become a world of its own. When the world of the Holy Grail was completely destroyed, this artifact would naturally appear in the endless divine realm. When that time came, it would be found, destroyed, and refined. The artifact spirit, Qin Guang, would naturally be dead. As for how the 9 ancient wells that Qin Guang was particularly concerned about were smuggled over, and how the Master God of Chaos forcefully broke the barrier and sent one of his hands into the heavenly grail, the endless divine realm had to pay a huge price for these things. The god emperors and low-tier Protoss were only projections. Moreover, the Origin Will had exploited the loophole in the heavenly grail to force the projection to conform to the rules and obtain the identity of a player. It was easy and didn't need to pay a huge price. However, the Master God of Chaos had come in person. Even if it was just a hand, it wasn't something that the heavenly grail could withstand. But if the entire plane was directly torn apart, the most likely outcome was that this extremely troublesome cup would disappear again. No one knew how many billions of years it would have to wait for it to appear again. Or perhaps, the next time it would secretly cause trouble, it would be more prepared and become more difficult to deal with. Therefore, even though the origin will of the God realm was completely emotionless, it still took a risk this time. Then he made use of the blood relationship between the Master God of Chaos and the Emperor of the Azure to trace the coordinates of the True Force realm, which was a small world across time and space. Then he sacrificed more than 3 million genius Xinhuang projections from all levels of the endless divine realm. Finally, he managed to send a hand of the Master God of Chaos into the True Force realm without destroying the stability of the realm of the Holy Grail. In the countless years of the God realm's existence, there had never been such a thing where the 8 Master Gods and their essence wills had joined forces. Yet they were only dealing with a weakling, and they had expended a huge amount of energy to do so. This was not difficult to understand. It was like an ordinary person who had a complicated glass piggy bank in front of them. They wanted to take out all the coins in it, but they were unwilling to destroy the piggy bank. So, the energy they had to expend would be countless times more than if they just smashed the piggy bank. It was normal for them to be sweating profusely from exhaustion. This was just a simplified explanation. In reality, the Origin Will and the 8 Master Gods had paid a huge price for this. After the Master God of Chaos had crushed Qin Guang with one palm, the Origin Will and the 8 Master Gods had taken the initiative to enter a deep sleep. They were only waiting for the Heavenly Grail's internal world to be destroyed and then reappear to find the cup. When that time came, it would not be easy to completely eliminate this tumor of the endless divine realm. Taking the initiative to enter a deep sleep to recover their strength was understandable. The Origin Will and the Master Gods were not worried that something out of their control would happen during this period of time. Of course, they did not have such things as emotions in the first place. In their minds, it was natural for them to decide on a matter and then complete it. The laws of the endless divine realm were formed by themselves, and the rules were set by themselves. Therefore, there was no possibility of failure. They only needed to wait for the matter to be completed naturally. It was like a person standing on a tall building and throwing an iron ball to the ground. Then the iron ball would definitely fall to the ground sooner or later. Although the current Heavenly Grail was an anomaly in the endless divine realm and brought about some uncertainty, it would return to the divine realm sooner or later. When that time came, everything would naturally go back to square one. There would not be any anomaly in the endless divine realm in the future. Everything could continue to evolve step by step. Of course, the lifespan of the Master Gods was indescribably long. The Origin Will of the divine realm had existed since ancient times. It was just a nap. When it woke up, everything would be fine. Time flew like an arrow, but it was also as slow as a snail. But no one could stop time from moving forward little by little. Even the master god of space and time, who controlled the laws of space and time, could only achieve eternal stillness in his own domain. But the price to pay was huge. As for the entire endless divine realm, and then specifically to the Heavenly Grail, and even more specifically to the true martial realm in the Heavenly Grail and the real world after the fusion, to achieve complete stillness was beyond the ability of the Master God of Space and Time. If it was possible, the Master God of Space and Time would even want to personally speed up the flow of time in the Heavenly Grail. After all, the sooner the Heavenly Grail appeared, the sooner this matter would be resolved. In the campus of Wujing University, the sun shone brightly on the vast Yuanming Lake. A gentle breeze blew, and the clear and crystalline waves twinkled like stars. Specks of light were reflected on the glass walls of the library, adding some beauty to the library in the afternoon. The green willow tree swayed slowly with the gentle breeze, looking sleepy. A few summer cicadas were lying on the branches of the willow tree, chirping more cheerfully than anyone else, contrasting with the dispirited and listless students on the long bridge over Yuanming Lake. However, not everyone on the bridge was in a bad state of mind. There were still some people who were chatting happily and were in high spirits. The fourth-year undergraduate students were finally about to graduate. They had already taken their graduation photos in the student robes. As for the students who were about to graduate, they formed teams to go to the school building to get their own graduation certificate, degree certificate, or completion certificate. Right, I heard that Qin Guang is coming too. Do you think it's necessary for him to do this? A graduation certificate is important to us, but it doesn't mean much to a rich man like him, right? Otherwise, even if he sends someone else to collect it on his behalf, the school won't say anything, right? That's not necessarily true. The richer and more powerful a person is, the more they care about their reputation. Qin Guang might be rich now, but that doesn't mean that he's flawless. Right now, everyone's staring at the stains on his private life, and if he wants to wash his name clean, then he can't be criticized elsewhere. Obtaining his graduation certificate is a small matter, but if it falls into the eyes of someone with ulterior motives and posted it on the internet, then it will become a loophole for others to attack. That's true. Maybe some people have already thought of the headlines. Billionaire graduate? The dignity of a prestigious school only exists in name. Who is to blame? It's all his own fault. Where did he get the guts to do this? What era is this? He still wants to learn from the ancient times and have multiple wives and concubines? It's not just multiple wives and concubines. He's blatantly having 1, 2, 3, 17, 8, and 9 concubines. Not that many, but who asked him to have such a big heart? Who asked him to have 2 national goddesses that everyone is jealous of? That's right. I really don't know what's wrong with people nowadays. They have no sense of shame at all. Keep your voice down. If someone else hears you, they'll definitely take revenge and make things difficult for you. In fact, there's nothing strange about these rich people's affairs. It's just that Qin Guang is too young and the women are too conspicuous. These things seem difficult for people to accept. That's right. Take the He family in Macau for example. Don't other people get along well with several wives? They laughed dryly and stopped discussing Qin Guang's private life. The reason was very simple. On the other side of the long bridge, Qin Guang was talking and laughing with his classmates all the way to this side. It was okay to gossip behind someone's back, but to discuss someone's private life in front of them was to offend them. Moreover, it was not a secret that Qin Guang had good ears. It was said that there was once a person who spoke ill of the little girl beside him, Sun Xiaoxuan, across a large square. He immediately chased after the person and slapped his face a couple of times. Even then he couldn't say anything to vent his anger. The reason was very simple. Qin Guang was the first to stand on the side of reason, and others couldn't afford to offend him. In the past few months, many things had happened on the campus of Wuxia University, in the vast Wuxia, and even in the world. Qin Guang seemed to have suddenly changed. He was no longer wandering outside for more than half of the year like he did last semester. He had been staying in school since the beginning of the semester. He also didn't cause trouble at school. Instead, he went to and left school like an ordinary student. Of course, it was impossible for him to be completely like an ordinary person. From time to time, people from outside the school would drive into the school to look for him. For example, several executives of the Tianguang group would come to visit him. He didn't have any scruples. His office was where he was, and others could often see a strange scene in the school. A group of people in suits and leather shoes would either sit on chairs by Yuanming Lake, stand in a corner of the square, or sit in a bar in the school's commercial street. They were talking about the Tianguang group's assets, which were worth hundreds of millions or even tens of billions. Until now, many of the IPs that Tianguang had laid out for a long time had been incubated. The global box office of Women had returned, World School of Performing Arts had been a global hit, and the variety show High God had been a hit since the 4th episode, sweeping the ratings and exporting it overseas. After the transformation of Tangshan Industrial Plant, Chengguang Environmental Protection had almost swept the national environmental protection industry with its disruptive heavy equipment. It had also reached agreements with many top laboratories around the world. Chengguang Environmental Protection provided technical support, and a number of scientific research institutions provided personnel, equipment, and other aspects of support. Several large photocatalyst research institutes were established, among which Chengguang Environmental Protection was in a leading position. In less than half a year, Tianguang Group and Chengguang Environmental Protection had transformed from two small unknown groups into behemoths with a valuation of more than $10 billion. They could even leverage the global market of $100 billion. For the past 6 months, however, the true master of this colossus had been like any other student. He'd stayed on campus, not going anywhere. There had been rumors that a boss like him didn't need to do everything himself. There would naturally be professionals to take care of the business for him. He just needed to make more money. He didn't have such lofty ideals in life like other rich people. He seemed to enjoy the treatment of a boss who didn't have to do anything himself. Of course, it seemed that there was really no need for him to struggle. With the growing influence of the new photocatalyst around the world, many people originally thought that Tianguang Group was his foundation. However, in just a few months, Chengguang Environmental Protection, which had derived all kinds of added value around the new photocatalyst, suddenly emerged. The world suddenly realized that even if this guy didn't do anything from now on with the patents in his hands, he could at least monopolize the market of $100 billion in the next 20 years. Not to mention the inevitable competition in the high-tech industry. This didn't exist at all because he had a complete technological monopoly. No one could crack it. Men were so young and rich. It was inevitable that there would be some scandals. Qin Guang's reputation in this area had never been good. He had never been a model of cleanliness. However, no one could stand the big thing he did last month. It wasn't that he had brazenly brought them to the front of the stage, but for some reason 2 months ago, a large group of girls with different temperaments, but all of them were beautiful enough to captivate even the birds and beasts, suddenly appeared on campus at the same time. Although Qin Guang used to meet different girls on campus from time to time, it had never happened before that all of them appeared at the same time. At that time, many people in the school saw the scene in the campus square. They thought it was a man's purgatory, the most terrible shuraba in the legends. However, none of these women made a fuss. Instead, they chatted happily. Qin Guang himself seemed very calm. No matter how fierce the storm was, he would not move. At that time, among these women there were Jiang Yage and Jin Shiyue, the two national goddesses who were popular all over the country, Sun Xiaoxuan, the campus belle Wu Tong, who was dressed in a police uniform, and Tang Ying, who had an elite temperament. Zhou Xian, the helmsman of Chengguang Environmental Protection, was also young and beautiful. It was rumored that she used to be Qin Guang's counselor. Many people in the school knew her. Although Lu Fei, the proud daughter of the Dechuan Lu group, was not famous in the eyes of ordinary people, there were still a few people in the large Gokyo University who knew her. No one expected her to be involved with Qin Guang. However, the ones who attracted the most attention were the other three. One of them was the famous campus belle Miss Wenwen, and the other two Lolitas Exin Qin and Wu Miaowan, who rarely appeared in public. These women appeared in the school at the same time. Coupled with the fact that they had appeared on the internet many times before, and Qin Guang had never denied the rumors, people could not help but wonder how big this guy's heart was. How shameless was he to be able to face the shuraba in broad daylight without batting an eyelid? In this world there were many people who were richer than him. There were also many people who had more women than him. However, there was no one who was as rich as him, had such high standards of women around him, and could risk the world's condemnation to get together in broad daylight. Even though the crowd did not gather for more than half an hour, and everyone quickly went their separate ways after that, the impact of the incident remained. Even today, 2 months later, it had not subsided. However, no matter what, after today, Qin Guang would officially graduate and leave Gokyo University. In the future, even if the students in the school wanted to mock him in secret or gossip about him, they would have to forcibly add the identity of an alumnus in their hearts. No one knew what Qin Guang's intention was at that time. Was he going to announce it to the world? However, there was no need for him to do so. After the incident, many people even indirectly asked around and found out that among the women who appeared at that time, not all of them had a substantial relationship with him. In fact, even Qin Guang himself did not know why this happened. Among the crowd, especially Jin Shiyue, Jiang Yage, Wu Tong, and Lu Fei, who had to face great pressure when they went home, they did not know why this happened either. Everything seemed very strange, very twisted, and very strange. At this moment, Qin Guang himself was still in the heavenly Holy Grail, unaware of the passage of time. The body he left in the outside world did not have a messy private life like others thought. Instead, it was as pure as a saint, and it had been a long time since he ate meat. Some people vaguely felt that the world was starting to become a little incomprehensible. The people they were familiar with seemed a little strange, but they could not find any loopholes. Chapter 1291. The whole world had come to a standstill. Some astute people would sigh like this in their hearts from time to time, but when these people turned their heads to look around them, the roads were still busy and all kinds of gossip on the internet were still going on. The English Premier League was about to come to an end, and the NBA Finals were won by the Warriors. This year's college graduates still received their respective graduation certificates one after another. Some people chose to apply for a bachelor's degree and devote themselves to society. Many people even signed contracts of intent with foreign companies in the first semester of their senior year, and only waited for graduation to go there. For example, the horny students in the Department of Finance of Gokyo University majored in international trade. This matter was also a good talk in the school. Many majors that scored higher than finance and international trade in the college entrance examination were not so popular. Many people regretted and were jealous. If they knew that the top 5 finance majors were so greedy, they would not have applied for environmental science. Of course, many people chose to take the postgraduate entrance examination. Among them, the environmental science was the representative. There were more than 30 people in Qin Guang's class, and more than 5 were confirmed to be postgraduate students. More than half of the students were ready to go all out for the postgraduate entrance examination. Based on everyone's usual grades, the probability of being admitted was not low. In Qin Guang's dormitory, unexpectedly, 2 of the 4 brothers were preparing to take the postgraduate entrance examination. One was Bai Nyangzi Bai Fan. Although this guy had been messing around during his 4 years in college and wrote some terrible online novels from time to time, this guy's grades had always been quite good. Before, he had said that he wanted Qin Guang to protect him, but that was just a casual remark and he did not take it seriously. The only online novel he wrote was the unlucky and deceptive female novel that was accidentally bought by Lu Xiaoyang. Later, Qin Guang did not advertise for him and each novel was a failure. Now Bai Nyangzi had completely given up on this idea. The other was Xianxia. Although Xianxia looked big and stupid, how many of the people who were admitted to the top 5 were really stupid? His grades in the class were above average, and if he worked hard for a while he still had hope of taking the postgraduate entrance examination. As for Lin Jingwei, he even directly guaranteed the graduate students at Peking University. Although Lin Jingwei did not stand out in class, his grades were always the best and he could be regarded as a straight-A student in his class. This meant that he would have to return to Yanjing after graduation and he had an appointment with Gaoya. Gaoya wasn't guaranteed a postgraduate degree, but she seemed to be planning to take it herself. In fact, with Lin Jingwei's family background, Gaoya could directly get into the Yan Capital University. However, she was proud and didn't want Lin Jingwei's family to stand up for her. She was confident that she could get into the university on her own. These 2 people of different backgrounds might really continue to walk together in the future. Sun Xiaoxuan's choice was very strange. She could have been guaranteed a postgraduate position at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, but she gave up at the last moment and gave her spot to another girl in her class whose grades were almost the same as hers. As for herself, she didn't say that she wanted to go abroad, Nor did she say that she wanted to stay in school to take the postgraduate entrance examination. However, she wasn't in a hurry to find a job, and when others asked her, she didn't say that she wanted to go back to her hometown to work. Gradually, everyone stopped asking about it. She was planning to stay in the 5 capitals, or wherever Qin Guang wanted to go, she would follow along. There wasn't much gossip in the class, but they felt that it wasn't worth it for her to do so. Not to mention the fact that Qin Guang was surrounded by beautiful girls. Everyone in the class knew that although they had feelings for each other, there was nothing between them after 4 years in university. Qin Guang had vaguely given her a status, but he had never taken the most important step in their relationship. Gao Ye's best friend couldn't figure it out and even gave her ideas from time to time. Since she had already made up her mind and didn't care about anything else, why did she have to be so reserved? She could find a chance to drug this guy or get him drunk. She could even force herself on him. However, Sun Xiaoxuan always smiled foolishly and refused. She looked as if she, the emperor, wasn't in a hurry, so why should she, the eunuch, be in a hurry? Gao Ye didn't know what to do, but she didn't insist. In short, no matter what thoughts they had, they couldn't beat the passing of time. After they got their diplomas, the only group activity left for the environmental engineering class was the last meal. From then on, everyone would go their separate ways, walk their own lives, and experience what they had to go through. Maybe one day in the future, everyone would want to have a reunion. They wouldn't all come, but they would at least get together in 2s and 3s to reminisce about their university years. At the corner of the Golden Campus Square, the owner of a barbecue shop was sitting quietly at his stall. His hands were moving up and down, and more than 100 skewers of barbecued meat were floating over the flame of the oven under the control of his dexterous and strong fingers. As they floated over, the fragrant and delicious grease was grilled out of the skewers and fell into the bonfire, igniting a bunch of flames and making a sizzling sound. The owner raised his head from time to time to look at the students who were sitting together, talking and laughing, hugging each other and crying or gulping down wine. He felt quite melancholy. Although it didn't matter who he was doing business with, these students were his old customers. Even if they left, new students would become his old customers next semester. After all, everyone was familiar with each other, so the owner was still a little reluctant to let them go. However, he soon shook his head. Why was he lamenting here? It was because Qin Guang was one of the students in this class and he had a deep impression of him. Actually, there weren't many students who knew his surname. Gao Ye opened her mouth and tore off a crisp bone from a bamboo skewer. She chewed on it and said in a muffled voice, "Xiaoxuan, I don't know what's going on, but I feel weird." Sun Xiaoxuan took a sip of juice and looked back at Gao Ye. He then stole a glance at Qin Guang, who was drinking with Lin Jingwei and the others. He said, "Actually, I think so too." Gao Ye stomped her feet impatiently. "What's going on? Everything is fine, but I feel like something is missing. I really don't understand." "Maybe you'll get it after a while." Sun Xiaoxuan's gaze landed on Qin Guang. Like the other girls around Qin Guang, Sun Xiaoxuan also felt that everyone was a little different since a few months ago. However, this feeling was very faint and mysterious. There was no evidence at all and there was no scientific reason for it. It was fine if the others changed. After all, they were all ordinary people. Their minds weren't very firm and mature. Maybe it had something to do with a nightmare. Wait, maybe it wasn't a nightmare? Speaking of which, I don't even know if my identity as a player is real or fake. I remember all those things, but it's only been a few months and my brain can barely remember them. My memory wasn't so bad before. Also, it's been a few months and there are no new missions. Why is that? Gao Ye began to mutter in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Sun Xiaoxuan didn't say anything. She just stared blankly at Qin Guang. Her eyes flashed, but in her mind she was thinking that everyone was like this. They were all players. Compared to ordinary people, Qin Guang was the one who was most likely to know the most secrets. However, when she asked him, he was also confused and had a headache. Sometimes it would even make him go crazy. After a long time, everyone avoided these topics in front of him. He was supposed to be a player, but he chose to forget about it. No one mentioned it to him. Regardless of whether it was Sun Xiaoxuan, Zhuo Jingxi, Lin Jingwei, or the executives in his company who were also players, or even his old subordinates in the summer of Wuxia, they had no choice but to come to a tacit agreement when faced with someone like him, who was undoubtedly the strongest player in the world. They couldn't bring themselves to say anything. The only S-rank player in the human world had probably gone berserk. No one was allowed to talk about player matters with him, much less the mission space. Otherwise he would go crazy and suffer from seizures. But they couldn't go on like this, could they? Sun Xiaoxuan shook her head helplessly. But what else could they do? Yes, there was nothing they could do. For players like Sun Xiaoxuan, the strongest was only a sea level. Other than waiting for Qin Guang to recover, there was nothing they could do. After all, even Wenwen, who stood at the peak of A level and might have reached S level, couldn't do anything. It was said that she tried to use the dual cultivation technique to forcibly awaken Qin Guang's memory, but she failed. This guy rejected her. That's right, he rejected her very firmly. When Wenwen showed the slightest sign of it, he turned around and ran. Even Wenwen, who had done it with him more than once in the past, had been sternly rejected by him. Needless to say, Sun Xiaoxuan, Tang Ying, Jin Shuiwei, and Wu Tong, who were close to him but had never done it with him. Speaking of which, he didn't know how Tang Ying's research was going. Many people didn't know that in addition to Morning Light environmental protection, Qin Guang had actually invested in another laboratory, which was the bioengineering laboratory led by Tang Ying. After becoming a player, Tang Ying, who was originally only a second-tier scholar in the world, suddenly had an epiphany, and the results came like a whirlwind. According to her, her IQ had also increased. In the past she was about 167. Although she could ride on the heads of ordinary people and beat them up, there was still a gap between her and many legendary geniuses in human history such as Planck, Tesla, Einstein, and Zhu Xian. But after awakening as a player, she claimed that her IQ was as high as 245. As for why it wasn't 250, she told people not to ask her why. In short, she lived frugally and guarded the samples she had taken from Qin Guang. The progress of her genetic analysis was improving almost every day. At first, in order to prevent the leak of Qin Guang's important resources, Tang Ying chose to work alone. But since Qin Guang began to act strangely, everyone became anxious, and Tang Ying's genetic analysis became a life-saving straw. After some discussion, they agreed that Tang Ying would distribute the samples to the top laboratories around the world through the method of gene cultivation and proliferation. Of course, she still had a trick up her sleeve. She only gave each laboratory a fragment. This precise gene fragment cutting method was something she had come up with herself in the past few months. According to her, she could probably win a Nobel Prize in biology in a few years. In the end, Tang Ying's task changed from a single person's hard work to a compilation of all the research results. This was extremely difficult for a researcher, but Tang Ying, who claimed to have an IQ of 245, was able to turn misfortunes into blessings. Of course, the help of other laboratories wasn't free, but the companies under Qin Guang were super rich. In addition, the Ministry of Heaven also allocated funds regardless of cost. Jiang Yage and Jin Shuiwei also contributed financially to the country. Although Qin Guang didn't want to be involved, everyone had their eyes on him, the only S-rank player at the moment. Even if the strength of many players had increased naturally and inexplicably over the past few months, the only thing that was undoubtedly the strongest class was still very important. Come to think of it, it was strange. The game space didn't descend again and no one did anything, but why did the players' levels increase inexplicably? No one would ever think that even though Qin Guang was already dead, he was still alive in a certain sense. Perhaps he was in between the living and the dead. In the past, every time he entered the world in the cup, it was only for a very short period of time in the real world and no one else knew about it. But it was different this time. If converted to the outside time, it had been from the beginning of the second semester of the 4th year until he received his graduation certificate and degree certificate. What he entered into the world in the cup was almost all of his soul. What was left outside in scientific terms was only equivalent to the little bit of intuition in his spine, which could generally control blood flow, knee-jerk reflex and so on. But it took too long this time. If he really died completely, then the Qin Guang in the outside world would probably be completely replaced by a soul fabricated by the heavenly Holy Grail. Perhaps this soul could inherit all of his memories, all of his personality, and help him complete the rest of his life. But a fabricated soul would always be a fabricated soul and not the real him. But the current situation was that although he was dead, he had completely merged with the heavenly Holy Grail, and this real world was a part of the heavenly Holy Grail. The current Qin Guang existed in the cloud city of the heavenly Holy Grail, in the realm of true force and also in the real universe. He had completely divided into countless particles, and was everywhere in all the worlds of the heavenly Holy Grail. Even in the real universe he was on Earth, and in distant galaxies such as Andromeda and Orion he was also present. He had turned into particles so small that it was negligible, even smaller than the so-called quark particles, but he really existed everywhere. In the real universe the world was still operating, although the direction of the operation was a little strange. So he who stayed outside had to live like a normal person. His soul, which had originally sunk into the heavenly Holy Grail, was slowly crossing the barrier of time and space, and returning to his body in the real world. As for the realm of true force, 1 billion years had passed. Just as Qin Guang was worried, the millions of human players in the 9th Holy City, including Chu Zijin, Zhou Jingxi and Lu Fei, were still unaware. Qin Guang had disappeared for 1 billion years, but everyone seemed to be in no hurry. It was as if he had just found a deserted place to slack off and take a nap. Chapter 1292. In the past billion years, everyone had found a position for themselves in the true martial domain, and then unswervingly walked towards this position. If Qin Guang were to sum up the current human players, they might be considered as humans, but in a sense they were not humans. The whole world was like a machine that would never wear out, and everyone in this world, a flower, a grass, a tree and an insect, were all parts of this world. The natives in the true martial domain were generally the kind of parts that could be worn out but could self-restore. As for the outsiders, the immortal belonged to the real high-level parts that would never be damaged or aged. Moreover, because of Qin Guang's disappearance, no one stood up to tell them that the situation was not right. Perhaps even if Qin Guang spoke to someone else, the other party might be able to understand his words, but they wouldn't be bothered by it in their minds. It was not only the immortal who had become slow, even the natives in the heavenly Holy Grail, and even Master Xen Qing and Wu Qingming, who were constantly dying and being reborn, did not feel anything wrong. But in fact, if a normal person could still remember time, they would be scared to the point of wetting their pants when they thought that someone had not aged for 1 billion years. Among these countless parts, there was one that was slightly different. It was not that she had realized something, but she had been doing the same boring thing over and over again in the past 1 billion years, just like everyone else. This was Tang Ying. As early as after Qin Guang left, Tang Ying spent about 10 years to finally complete the first analysis of Qin Guang's genes in this world. The Lord Holy Emperor had disappeared, and they couldn't get a new sample. However, Tang Ying in the true martial world had also patted his forehead, and had a sudden inspiration. He had thought of a way to combine martial arts with science. Coincidentally, a female captain of the Holy City's Gotiai 13 practiced a martial technique that was compatible with longevity, and was best at stimulating biological activity. When Qin Guang had created this martial technique, he had borrowed the idea of Emperor Qing's lost technique from a novel he had read in the past. It was called In Search of Supernatural Records. Although it wasn't as marvelous as the Xuanhuan novel in the true martial world, its destructive power wasn't bad. Qin Guang first passed it to a younger brother, and it was passed down from generation to generation. When Tang Ying came up with this idea, a woman happened to inherit it. With the cooperation of the two, the sample was successfully multiplied and the research continued. After a few decades, Tang Ying finally finished decoding Qin Guang's genes for the first time. In fact, it shouldn't have taken so long. However, although the overall technological level of the Zhen Wuxia in the real world was almost the same, the production of high-precision instruments was still slower. In the past 50 years, Tang Ying had been waiting for at least 30 years for the equipment to hatch. When Qin Guang left, the frame she built was barely usable, but it was not precise enough. Logically speaking, after completing the first complete deciphering, Tang Ying should have nothing to do. However, she did not feel that anything was wrong and started to decipher from the beginning again. Then she compared the results of the 2 times, and it took her another 20 years to find something different. It was reasonable to say that DNA represented the most stable structure in human genetics. If there was a genetic mutation, it was either cancer or deformity. Then she used the same person's sample for both times. Even if it was multiplied and cultivated, it should be exactly the same. In addition, she used the same person's sample for both times. Even if it was multiplied and cultivated, it should be exactly the same. Then why were the results of the 2 attempts different? Tang Ying was puzzled, so she didn't think too much about it. Then she started the 3rd time, and it took her another 20 years. Then she combined the results of the 3 times and compared them together. This time it took her 30 years, but she found something different. 1 billion years passed in the blink of an eye. Tang Ying couldn't remember how many millions of times she had repeated the same thing. What made her feel desperate was that even though she had repeated it so many times, she still faced the same situation 1 billion years ago. The results were not exactly the same. Thanks to the further improvement of the semiconductor industry, the true martial realm had a vast territory. Although there hadn't been any revolutionary scientific and technological progress, the computing power of the supercomputing system in the true martial realm had already surpassed the Earth by many times. Who told the world to be so big, to be able to stack materials regardless of the cost? So, in the later stages, Tang Ying, who had the ability to use the supercomputer at any time, no longer needed to compare the gene sequences. She only needed to input the data into the supercomputer center and then wait for the results. It was much faster than doing it herself. Of course, it also took a long time. A single gene sequence was a huge amount of data, not to mention that Tang Ying had slowly accumulated to tens of millions of times. Tang Ying, who was wearing a white coat, was sitting on an ergonomic chair. She looked at the progress bar in front of her, which had reached 98%. In fact, she had been waiting here for more than 10 days. Although there was only 0.2% left, she was afraid that it would take at least half a day to finish. Ring ring ring. Tang Ying's phone beside her rang with a text message. She stretched and picked up the phone. The text message was, "Notice. All directors of the Martyr's Palace, please head to the mysterious Heaven Palace to attend the regular board meeting within an hour." Tang Ying shrugged and looked at the progress bar unhappily. It was still at 98%. "Forget it, I don't think it will be finished in a short time. It will be the same if I come back after the meeting. I really don't want to be a director anymore, Sai." Unlike the others who were immersed in their different identities, Tang Ying had only been guarding her research center for the past few years. For example, Wu Tong had given herself the title of Zhen Wujia's Public Security Department. Now her authority was no longer limited to the 9th floor. She was in charge of the public security departments of the entire Zhen Wujia. The others were more or less the same. Jin Shuiwei and Jiang Yage had held concerts in the 9 holy cities and other 2nd and 3rd tier cities. The reason why Tang Ying was still a director was because she needed unlimited authority to use the supercomputer center, as well as to allocate resources to operate and develop her own biological research center. The power structure of the Martyr's Palace had evolved over the years. It had changed a lot since Chen Guang left. Currently, Wu Tong, Tang Ying, Sun Xiaoxuan, Zhu Jingxi and Lin Jingwei, who were closest to Chen Guang, were all directors. In addition, there were the inheritors of the 3 emperors in the 9th holy city, as well as 2 or 3 new top martial emperors who had risen in recent years. Abbess Xin Yuan and Wu Qingming, the 2 masters, were not there. Although they had already recognized their disciples, the 2 of them had already assimilated with this world. They didn't have the physique of immortality. They died 1,000,000 years after Chen Guang left. But after a few years, the 2 of them cultivated martial arts again and returned to the 9th holy city. The 2 of them were somewhat different from the real natives of the true martial domain. Ever since their memories were awakened by Chen Guang, they wouldn't lose their memories even if they were reborn. The Martyr's Palace's directors' meeting was held once every 10 years. But this time the 2 masters were not there. They had been reborn 2 years ago. Only God knew which corner they were cultivating martial arts again. There wasn't anything extraordinary in the regular meeting. They talked about the recent major events that had taken place in the true martial world. They talked about whether there was anything worth paying attention to. They also talked about where Chen Guang might have gone and so on. In fact, he had been missing for 1 billion years. But at the meeting, these people talked as if they had just seen him half an hour ago. This so-called meeting was nothing more than a concrete embodiment of the power structure of the true martial domain. To put it bluntly, it was just a gathering of people from time to time. But Tang Ying was quite absent-minded from beginning to end. She had a strong desire to go back and see the results of the calculation. "Why are you in a daze? Let's go out later?" Wu Tong, who was sitting next to Tang Ying, elbowed her waist. Tang Ying shook her head. "No, I'm busy." Wu Tong covered her mouth and laughed. "Why are you always guarding that broken place of yours? You're going to get old if you keep staying at home." Tang Ying rolled her eyes. "I can't be bothered to joke with you. I reckon we'll see the results this time." Wu Tong continued to tease her. "Come on, I don't know how many times I've heard you say that." "Hey, how many times?" Wu Tong seemed to have a momentary doubt as she spoke. She seemed to be asking Tang Ying but also seemed to be asking herself. In fact, the two of them didn't know that they had already had a similar conversation more than 1,000,000 times. Not only did they say the same words, but even their tone and expressions were completely the same. But this time the conversation between the two was a little different. Wu Tong asked a question at the end. Tang Ying frowned slightly. She wasn't angry at Wu Tong. Instead, the restless feeling in her heart was getting stronger and stronger. She couldn't care less about Bai Hua, who was excitedly introducing the new discovery of the energy company. She got up and walked out. "Hey Lady Ying, where are you going?" Wu Tong asked as she got up. Tang Ying walked quickly. "I won't be coming to dinner tonight. I'm going back to the lab to take a look." After saying that, she jogged all the way. Her steps were swift. Wu Tong thought for a moment and followed her. Before she left, she turned around and said to everyone, "Nothing big has happened in the police department recently. I'm going to take a look at the situation." After saying that, Wu Tong also ran away. Although the others were a little surprised, they didn't care too much. In the real world, although everyone was familiar with Chen Guang, they didn't meet each other often. They had been in the Zhen Wuxia for 1,000,000,000 years, but there was no substantial progress in their friendship. Basically, everyone was still minding their own business. Wu Tong followed Tang Ying's pace and rushed back to the lab. When she pushed the door open, she saw Tang Ying staring at the monitor in a daze. Wu Tong approached her and asked, "What the hell is going on?" Tang Ying didn't answer for a long time. After a long time, she muttered to herself with a blank face, "How could this be? It's impossible. What the hell is going on?" Seeing her blank eyes, Wu Tong panicked. Tang Ying slammed the table and said, "I get it. This guy's genes are different from ordinary people. Even the dimensions are different." Wu Tong didn't understand what she was saying at all. She simply grabbed Tang Ying's shoulder and shook it. "Are you stupid because of your research?" Tang Ying broke away from Wu Tong's hands and threw herself in front of the monitor again. Her eyes widened as she looked at the new DNA combination diagram that was moving like the Milky Way. There were countless small dots constantly moving on it, and each dot represented the most basic DNA unit. The DNA structure of ordinary people was, of course, stable, but the three-dimensional diagram in front of Tang Ying never stabilized for a second. In fact, she didn't know how the supercomputer center did the calculations. All the previous results could be shown in a flat way, but this time after the comparison a picture like this appeared. After a long time, Tang Ying finally calmed down and said with a strange look on her face, "I knew it. This guy is different from us." "What do you mean?" Wu Tong felt that Tang Ying was becoming more and more paranoid. She wondered if she should find a master who practiced spiritual-type skills to help her. "You've heard the story of the worm, right?" Tang Ying turned around and asked. "Wu Tong? ? If you put a piece of paper in front of you, the surface area of this paper is infinite, and then put a worm on it. No matter how the worm crawls, even if it crawls for a lifetime, its trajectory will be limited to this piece of paper. But humans can directly grab it and throw it into the air." Wu Tong understood a little. "Aren't you talking about the difference between two-dimensional life and three-dimensional life?" Tang Ying nodded. "Yes, in our understanding we live in a three-dimensional world and human beings are also three-dimensional life forms. To be more specific, each of our genes are basically determined from birth. Even changes in individual cells can't affect our overall state. Our height, appearance, and body shape are generally limited to a certain range after birth. What about Chen Guang? You've been doing analysis for so many years. What have you found?" Tang Ying sighed. "His DNA is different from ours. This guy's genes are changing. Furthermore, it is eternally changing with time." Wu Tong asked, "So what does this mean?" Tang Ying looked back at the monitor in front of her. "This means that I'll never be able to get the real answer. Even though it seemed that I had completed it tens of millions of times and finally created such a three-dimensional image, I felt that I could continue to repeat it tens of millions of times on the basis of this image. At that time, I would probably be able to create a second three-dimensional image, but the two three-dimensional images would still be able to be combined together. Perhaps, even if I make tens of millions of such three-dimensional pictures and continue to combine them, I still won't get anything. This guy's genetic sequence is simply tens of millions to the infinite power." Wu Tong was a little confused, but that didn't stop her from feeling Tang Ying's despair. While the two were talking, the nebula picture on the monitor began to change, becoming smaller and smaller. Huh! Tang Ying exclaimed in surprise. She saw the nebula picture that originally covered the entire monitor shrink to the size of a pixel. Then it floated out of the monitor and flew into the air. Wu Tong muttered to herself, "What's going on?" Tang Ying was also stunned. "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" The two inside didn't know that time had once again stopped in the real world outside. In the Biology Research Institute of the Five Capital, Tang Ying was jumping in the air in ecstasy. Her hair was fluttering, her legs were bent, and her whole body was half a meter above the ground. On the monitor in front of her was a three-dimensional picture that was exactly the same as what Tang Ying had seen in the true martial domain. One had used 1 billion years and repeated it tens of millions of times, while the other had only used half a year, but the final result was the same. Of course, this three-dimensional picture was also shrinking, leaving the monitor and floating into the air. In the deepest part of the heavenly Holy Grail, in a certain spatial gap in the infinite darkness and far away, two particles the size of pixels floated over from the void. They slowly stuck to each other and then completely fused into an extremely tiny bright spot. Then this bright spot began to move, turning into a line. This line spread out, then kept changing direction, hovering, and finally became a human shape. Qin Guang suddenly opened his eyes. "I'm back again." Chapter 1293. He tried to raise his hand and touch his face, but he failed. He couldn't find his hand at all. No, he didn't have a hand. He didn't have any other limbs, waist, abdomen, chest, buttocks, or even a head or a neck. Right now he had a humanoid shape, but in essence, it was still the trajectory drawn in the void by the fusion of the two pixels. It was similar to the principle of the electron cloud. Of course, the electron cloud didn't really exist. It was just an electron moving at a high speed within a certain range. Then, it was constantly captured by the microscope and the trajectories were gathered on a picture. What was presented was the electron cloud. At this time, Qin Guang was more advanced than the electron cloud. At least it was a trajectory drawn by a whole line of continuous motion. Of course, maybe it was because the speed of the previous dot was too fast, or maybe it was because the speed of light dissipating in this special space was too slow. So, it looked like a whole body at this time, but in fact it was just pure energy. Qin Guang didn't have anything to be angry about. At least he now had consciousness again and could think in his mind. This was much better than being in a daze before. As for the previous period of time, Qin Guang still had some vague memories. It was difficult for him to describe that feeling. After thinking about it, he could only say that it was like a person who couldn't drink well suddenly drinking half a caddy of erguotu. How long have I been in a coma? Since he couldn't move, Qin Guang simply let his mind wander. Now he felt very strange again. It seemed that he had been in a coma for half a year, but it also seemed like it was only for a moment. Suddenly, there was a vast and distant feeling in his heart. He felt as if hundreds of millions of years had passed, enough for the life on Earth to evolve from a single cell to a human. This strong feeling of dislocation didn't make Qin Guang feel uncomfortable. He was very indifferent now, as if nothing mattered. Outside, since he woke up, the time in the real world and the true martial domain had been completely frozen, even if the flow of time in the true martial domain had been accelerated by billions of times. Qin Guang did not know what he was waiting for, nor did he know why he was in this state in the void. He also did not know what was waiting for him next. When a person completely lost the concept of time, no matter how boring the wait was, it would not shake his state of mind. "Nicole, you have two choices now. First, reject my request, then watch as Qin Guang and I meet our end. If you're lucky, you'll be able to escape when the Holy Grail is destroyed. At that time, you'll become a member of the God realm and obtain a seemingly eternal life. Second, voluntarily offer your mechanical heart, accept the fate of death, and pray for our success. At that time, even if you die, he will have the ability to create nothingness with a single thought after transcending the myriad worlds. Even if you're really dead, he can resurrect you and give you a true life." On the other side of the void, there was a small round ball floating, and a faint silhouette of a person appeared in the small ball. This small ball was the photocatalyst research world that Qin Guang had accidentally created. Of course, after a long period of investment in faith, this small laboratory in the cup had already expanded far beyond the scope of a laboratory, becoming a large-scale research center. Nicole's scope of research had also long since broken away from the limits of photocatalysis, and expanded infinitely according to her own interests. As a science geek with a clear brain, Nicole mainly researched machinery and electronics in the real world. She was also proficient in various basic subjects such as physics, chemistry, mathematics, and so on. She also had incredible talent, and even though she was working alone, she was still able to research an unimaginable epic-making thing like the electromagnetic cannon. Although it wasn't stable and even blew herself up, if it wasn't for that accident back then, Xianxia would have spent a few more years perfecting it. Perhaps she would have been able to create a true finished product of this revolutionary weapon of mass destruction. Although she was dead now, she had entered this cup in the cup, and obtained an almost eternal life. Now that several months had passed in the real world and 1,000,000,000 years had passed in the realm of true force, the small world that Nicole stayed in had simply advanced by 10 billion years, which was even longer than the lifespan of Earth. With such a long time and tireless, even an ordinary person should have become a super genius, not to mention a natural genius like Nicole. She would never be unable to find a direction of research. Not to mention Earth's technology. Just the picture of God that suddenly unfolded in front of her after her soul was sucked into the heavenly Holy Grail was enough to exhaust her eternal wisdom, but she still could only see the tip of the iceberg. Of course, even the tip of the iceberg was enough for Nicole's understanding of the rules of the God realm to reach the level of a God Emperor. If she could have the opportunity to leave the heavenly Holy Grail and descend into the God realm, with her current understanding of the rules, she could become a new God Emperor in a very short time. But now Azure had presented her with two choices. Did you know that I would definitely agree? Sitting in the laboratory, Nicole raised her head and looked at the shadow in front of her. She did not have any excessive reaction and asked very calmly. Azure's voice came from the shadow. Yes, the more you understand God, the more you will understand what we want. Nicole was silent. She still remembered the excitement and curiosity when she first came into contact with God after she was killed in the explosion. Now she did not know how many years had passed, but she had slowly changed from the initial curiosity to the current understanding. When the veil of God was lifted layer by layer, Nicole's reverence towards God gradually dissipated. It turned out that the so-called God was nothing more than this. They had a longer lifespan, greater strength, and some supernatural special abilities. These abilities were strange, strong, and weak, but they all came from the God race's understanding of the so-called rules. After Nicole spent 10 billion years peeling off the silk cocoons and penetrating the seemingly mysterious rules of the God realm bit by bit, her perception of the so-called God stopped at nothing more than another relatively high-level life in another dimension. The essence of the God realm's rules was no different from the two iron balls on Earth falling at the same time. What was it that he really wanted? What was the true life that this God Emperor named Luli was talking about? But I really want to know what a God Emperor with mechanical power would be like. Although I can roughly imagine it in my mind, I haven't seen it with my own eyes. Nicole said with slight unwillingness. The shadow said disdainfully, "What's there to see? It's nothing more than some summoned creatures, or else it's a mechanical body. This Emperor has seen a movie on Earth called Transformers. You can probably think of yourself as the original core of Cybertron. Is that so? A God Emperor with mechanical life appeared in the God realm before? No, but I've heard that God Emperor Qianji is obsessed with the love puppet technique. A plane he created once gave birth to a mechanical life with strength close to that of a God Emperor. As for you, you're probably just a little higher level. But how do I know that you won't lie to me? What if you fail? Or even if you succeed, you can't return the mechanical heart and I won't be able to resurrect." Nicole was already wavering. Azure did not mind. If you think that this Emperor and Qinguang will lie to you and go back on their word, you can refuse. Ever since we started on this path, every step we took was extremely dangerous and we could fail at every step. If you can't sincerely take the initiative to strip the mechanical heart, even if there is only a trace of doubt, we will definitely fail. After we die, this Holy Grail will naturally perish. At that time you can just go and be a God Emperor. If your luck is good enough and your life is tough enough, you might even be able to become a main god. Nicole waved her hand in pain. But that's meaningless. No matter how long my life is, I will eventually be assimilated by the entire God realm. That is equivalent to a complete death. She remembered that she had once been promised eternal life, but now she had long since given up on the idea of eternal life. No matter how long she lived in the endless God realm, in the end she could only end up with her consciousness and divine sense completely disappearing and dying. Only the countless rules and origin energy that she cultivated during her long life would be turned into stars and absorbed by the entire God realm. Such eternal life was even worse than death. As if she had already sensed Nicole's thoughts, Azure said, "Your guess is right. This is also what this emperor thinks. We are probably just pieces of bricks. The meaning of our birth and growth is ultimately to add bricks and tiles to the endless God realm. Although we don't know who is controlling everything from the outside, nor do we know why the other party would spend such a huge amount of energy and time to construct the endless God realm, this is still very unfair to us, right?" When she spoke of this, Lily felt very lonely in her heart. Just like the gods who played around with the planes in the God realm, who knew how many lower planes there were within the jurisdiction of the endless God realm. The countless lives in the countless planes had experienced an endless amount of time, but in the end, they were just adding rules to the endless God realm bit by bit. Perhaps at the moment when the God realm was finally completed, the gods would finally perish and everything would turn into nothingness. When they looked up again, they would just be a plaything for a child from the outside world. However, this child who thought that he was a sovereign was also rising layer after layer, as if there was no end to it and there was no hope in sight. So far, everything seemed to be going smoothly for her and Qin Guang's desperate struggle, but it was still unknown whether they would be able to achieve their goal in the end. On the other side, Nicole finally nodded. "All right, I agree." On the other side of the void, Qin Guang's body trembled slightly. Just now he seemed to feel a slight vibration in his body. Originally, his body did not have a physical body. Since it could vibrate, it meant that there was a change. After a long time, Qin Guang could clearly feel that his body was finally starting to slowly become physical again. However, he still could not move and the changes outside were still continuing. Chapter 1294. On the completely still earth, there were 10 corners that were undergoing strange changes. These corners were scattered all over the world. There were 4 in Wuxia and the other 6 were either in the depths of the Amazon forest at the edge of Greenland, or on a small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or in a hollow in a valley under the Alps. These corners had a lot in common. There were statues that had been erected not long ago, and below the statues sat, knelt, or stood. There were as many as 10,000 and as few as 1,000 people. The statues that they made were the 10 statues that Qin Guang had painstakingly collected in Cloud City. In the real world outside, these man-made statues were almost exactly the same as the statues that Qin Guang had obtained. It was strange that no one had ever seen the 7 statues that Qin Guang had left behind. However, the architects and craftsmen who were responsible for designing and making these statues were able to think of the shapes that they had in their minds from the very beginning. When they had really finished making them, they felt that some of the statues were not very elegant, and even made people feel that they were very strange. For example, an abstract work like half an alto car, ordinary people really couldn't understand it. However, once the shape was decided, no one asked for it to be changed. Of course, it was fortunate that the legendary pile driver idol didn't materialize into a sect and was left in the sea of time. Otherwise, no matter how thick-skinned a person was, they wouldn't be able to accept their idol's appearance. Since it was called a religion, of course, only those who had faith and pursuits would join. They attributed the inspiration of these strange statues to the guidance of God. It was precisely the God that they believed in that was secretly guiding them. That was why they burst forth with this kind of inspiration that ordinary people couldn't understand. However, it was precisely because of this that the incomprehensible statues felt especially unique in their hearts. When they stood under the statues to pray or make a wish, they could feel a stronger power of wish, as if the distance between them and God was invisibly pulled closer. Although the people under the statues were in different postures, these people all had similar expressions on their faces. Slightly squinting their eyes, a tranquil smile on their face, and their lips slightly curled up, they looked so comfortable and carefree as if they had forgotten all their troubles. Thick, thin, pure white or light green threads extended from the heads of these believers, and connected to the statues in front of them. There were still many people around the world who recognized or joined the statue sect who had yet to appear in front of the statue, but this did not stop them from contributing their faith. The same threads of faith spread from all over the world, connecting to the statue from afar. For example, the link between Lu Fei and the half-alto statue was a dark green thread as thick as a thumb. Although she had long since stopped racing cars, this did not prevent her from continuing her hobby. She could always compare other people's achievements with Chen Guang's. However, the more she compared, the more she realized how unsurpassable Chen Guang was. When the power of faith was condensed to the extreme, the 10 statues began to emit a hazy shimmer, and this brilliance became brighter and brighter as time passed. When the brightness exceeded the limit, the statues, which were either made of marble plated with bronze, or simply made of reinforced concrete, emitted thick smoke at the same time. Thick smoke rose, but the statues disappeared at an extremely fast speed from top to bottom. After the statues disappeared, the threads of faith above everyone's heads disappeared as well, taking away everyone's faith in God. In the void, Qin Guang trembled slightly after obtaining the mechanized and condensed skeleton. He could clearly feel that his body was gradually becoming more substantial. The pixels formed by the fusion of genetic sequences outlined his silhouette, and the mechanical heart that Nicosia gave him formed his skeleton. Now these beliefs collected from Earth began to supplement his flesh and blood on the foundation of the skeleton. When the 10 statues on Earth completely disappeared, although he still couldn't move, he knew that something had been added to his body. Probably a Tetris? Other than lampooning inwardly, Lord Guang could do nothing else. He didn't know that the outside world had been frozen, nor did he know that his 10 statue sect members had built statues for him, and now the statues had flown away. Following that, the faith formed by the 10 statues seemed to have opened up a mysterious passage. After they passed through, the passage didn't disappear. Soon the people on Earth changed again. The bald president of the Anti-Light Alliance was sitting on a rattan chair in an outdoor tea house with his legs crossed. The cigarette between his fingers was still curling up, and the cigarette rose from his hand and floated in the air. At a glance, it was in the shape of a dragon. At this moment he was leaning against the back of the rattan chair with his head raised. His eyes were slightly glazed over and he seemed to be at a loss. Just a moment ago he was bragging to his friends about his past glory, about how I was like when I was the president of the Anti-Light Alliance, about how Qin Guang trembled when he saw me, and about how the girls in the Anti-Light Alliance idolized me, blah 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 blah. Of course, everyone knew that he was basically bragging. Everyone knew that he, the president of the Anti-Light Alliance, was the only person who hated Qin Guang. The others were all die-hard fans. Also, there wasn't a single female member in the Anti-Light Alliance. Even if there was, it could only be because he had disguised himself as a woman. His friends didn't laugh at him. Everyone knew that he had been living a bleak life for the past few months. Qin Guang didn't keep a high profile anymore. Instead, he focused on staying in school and being a good student. This caused the Anti-Light Alliance to be at a loss and have nothing to do. That was why the bald president could sit here and chat with his friends. If it was in the past, he would have led his people to chase after Qin Guang and cause trouble wherever he went. At this moment, a white mist was coming out of the bald president's head. This white mist was the strong obsession he had with Qin Guang. The middle-aged men beside him also had smoke coming out of their heads, but it wasn't as thick as the president's. Although these people weren't interested in Qin Guang, they had been indoctrinated by their friends like this every day, so they had no choice but to know about it. At the same time, other than the members of the 10 divine statue sects and those who had previously given faith to Qin Guang, there were at least 3 billion people around the world who had smoke coming out of their heads as well. Even if they didn't have much admiration for Qin Guang, everyone had more or less heard of him and this name was in their minds. Now that they were being taken away, it was the faith in Qin Guang in their hearts. In the distant depths of the universe, there was a planet that was 70% to 80% similar to Earth. It was about 3 times the size of Earth. On this similarly azure planet, there lived a race that was extremely similar to humans. However, they were slightly shorter and had pointy ears, resembling the elves in fantasy novels. At this moment, in the sacred land of the elves, an emerald green spaceship was slowly rising into the sky. The people on this planet also knew about Qin Guang's existence. They even planned to send a spaceship to contact Qin Guang. However, before their spaceship could take off, time froze. On this planet, there were also many people with smoke coming out of their heads. The smoke was many times fainter than that of the people on Earth, but it still existed. In the universe, there were at least hundreds of thousands of planets with life that were experiencing the same thing. Humans didn't know that in the vast universe, there were at least hundreds of thousands of cosmic races that were paying attention to everything on Earth. At this moment, all of their faith had gathered together and crossed the infinite distance to slowly fly towards the passage. Qin Guang sat up straight and looked down. There was an indescribably complicated expression on his face. After such a long sleep he finally woke up. However, before he could carefully examine his body, he only felt an irresistible and tyrannical suction force. He heard Azure's voice that he hadn't heard for a long time. "Young man, do your best. There are still 2,813 worlds and cups waiting for you." Qin Guang was shocked. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Either we all die or you conquer the entire world within cup." Qin Guang said, "I need to discuss this with the spirit of the Holy Grail. At least let me know what's going on." Azure only chuckled. "Why don't you think about it carefully?" Qin Guang was at a loss at first. Then he came to a sudden realization and his face turned ashen. "I've become the spirit of the Holy Grail. I have to conquer myself?" Chapter 1295. He did not have much time to dawdle. Just as he said that in his mind, he was sucked into the space-time tunnel in the next instant. This tunnel was still the same familiar feeling that he had experienced countless times before. There was not much change. The only difference was that when Qin Guang stayed in the tunnel previously, he had no way of knowing what the next world and cup looked like. Even though he already knew the specific scope of the world within the cup, it was only a general concept. He had no way of knowing the exact shape of the world within the cup. But this time he had a very clear picture of the overall structure of the world within the cup. What awaited him now was the world of esports. In the past, Qin Guang had trained his Dota Tower technique to perfection in the cup world. However, Dota Tower was only a type of esports and it could only be considered as one of the MOBAs. It couldn't represent all esports. Right now, Qin Guang would be facing the advanced version of esports in the third stage of the Yunxiang Cup. He would have to train in all the esports realms from the day he was born, including but not limited to CS, Soccer, CF, Dota, LOL, Kings of Glory, and so on. Even PUBG, which had recently become popular, would be in the list. Qin Guang was very puzzled. If he remembered correctly, he had not pursued anything in the game for a long time. Why did the World and Cup suddenly give him a mission for no reason? However, he did not feel any pressure. It was a game after all. It was a test of the player's on-the-spot reaction, tactical thinking, and other qualities. There would be some differences between different types, but there were many similarities in essence. For example, in the recent super popular PUBG games, retired professional Dota and LOL players learned faster than ordinary players, and their relative standards were also higher. This was the reason why Qin Guang had now reached the peak of Dota, and then went on to dabble in RTS, FPS, and sports games. His starting point was very high. Thus, this time in the World and the Cup he was able to learn very quickly, much faster than before. Back then he had trained hard in the small pool for several years. Now that he was in the third tier of the Elephant Sky Cup, the small pool had become the esports training center. The computer equipment hadn't been upgraded much, but his sparring partners were many times better than the computer people back then. The consciousness of all the famous top players in the history of competitive gaming were perfectly copied into the game. The Human Emperor, Beast King, and Moon Devil in World of Warcraft, the Hierarch in Flash and StarCraft. In short, anything you wanted was there. No one had ever been able to enjoy such comprehensive training as Qin Guang. Even if it was just an ordinary person with such an opportunity, they would at least be able to train to the semi-professional level. Moreover, Qin Guang's talent was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He played all kinds of games at an extremely fast speed, averaging one game every 2 weeks. He absolutely crushed everything. During the whole process of the challenge, Qin Guang had a feeling in his heart. Even though he was fighting with the advanced artificial intelligence created by the World and the Cup, he felt like he was fighting with his left and right hands. This was probably why Azure said he had become the spirit of the Holy Grail. At this time, the electronic notification sound was gone. There was no need for it. He knew how far things had gone. Throwing the keyboard in his hand, Qin Guang got up and stretched. Then, in the process of stretching, his body was sucked into the space-time tunnel. He didn't need any reminder at all. He knew in his heart whether he was done or not. This time he didn't even have time to rest. After finishing one, he went straight to the next. The Cloud Sky Cup's World and the Cup far surpassed One Line Sky in terms of area and quality of the world structure. Of course, the ability that Qin Guang needed to train was also far beyond One Line Sky and One Line Sky. After becoming the strongest esports player in human history, he didn't even get to be proud for a few minutes before he was suppressed by the New World in the cup. Even though the old man had boasted that he was a top student, it didn't mean that he really wanted to be a top student. I'm about to become a god. I'm about to defy the heavens. I'm about to conquer the divine realm. I'm clearly a city boy turned into a fantasy male pig. What's the use of learning this? Now you're telling me that I want to learn mathematics? That's right, the world in front of him was the world of mathematics. Qin Guang was very hurt. He wasn't afraid of hardship, tiredness, or difficulties. As long as he could become stronger, anything was fine. Whether it was the innate talent ability of the past or the new version of innate strength, it didn't lose to the so-called mathematics in terms of profoundness. In terms of cultivation, every time he wanted to take a step forward, he had to thoroughly understand the entire set of cultivation techniques. Now that the rules were involved, he had to go through all of them in his mind and understand them one by one. In the past, when he practiced martial arts in the realm of true force, the various ancient books he faced were all unpredictable and difficult to understand. There were often situations where he could understand every single word but couldn't understand a whole sentence. Just reading the ancient books was difficult enough, let alone learning them. This was countless times more difficult than simply reading and learning. Every step required an extremely strong talent and a crazy brain burn. Even so, he still learned it all. But now he was asked to learn mathematics from beginning to end like a student. He felt that it was meaningless and wanted to protest. I know that mathematics is known as the foundation of science. All theoretical research can be attributed to mathematics. There are even theoretical masters who can use mathematics to explain the evolution of the universe, species evolution, or space-time wormholes. Otherwise, they can directly calculate the density of the illusory antimatter. But theory is theory after all. No matter how profound it is, it can only stay on paper. Unless all aspects of science and technology keep up, even if someone jumps out and brings humanity's mathematics level forward by 300 years, it's basically useless. 1 step ahead is a genius, 10 steps ahead is a lunatic, 300 years ahead is basically a hole to bury. No matter what you say, others can't understand it at all. What's the use? I protest. Can I not learn? My protest was unsurprisingly ineffective. About 300 years later, Qin Guang became the most comprehensive mathematician in human history after Archimedes, Newton, Gauss, Euler, and Riemann. Perhaps his mathematical talent was completely inferior to those who were known as the king of mathematics, the prince of mathematics, or the god of mathematics, but he could use a full 300 years to learn. The first 200 years were all kinds of force-feeding, the last 100 years were summarized, and then he became a master. Don't ask me what 1 plus 1 is. Such a profound question. I can only tell you clearly that it is equal to 2. Don't you admire me? The legendary gold box conjecture that has baffled mankind for many years was solved by me. What? You want me to prove it? I can prove it, but you can't understand it. You won't understand it anyway, so you just need to know the result. Don't look at me with that kind of admiration. I just have a small achievement. In short, after spending hundreds of years, Qin Guang did indeed reach unprecedented heights in the subject of mathematics. Even the 3 major conjectures that had troubled mankind for hundreds of years had no difficulty in front of him. Unfortunately, at this time he could only be in a rather depressed state. If he could go out and return to the real world, he would have 10,000 ways to show off in his mind. But right now he could not go out, and he had to continue to strive for the next world within a cup. Defeating oneself was not the most difficult thing, but after defeating oneself, one could not tell others how bad *SS1 was. Forget it, I'll just leave it at that. What I'm doing now is called practicing internal energy. After I succeed, I'll go out and show off. Anyway, I know more and more I will be able to use it sooner or later. Imagine standing on the street by yourself. First, you kill all the cunning people in the park who set up chess stalls to cheat money. Then you go back and shock the math Olympiad students who meet in the park. When the others still haven't recovered from their shock, you can pat the shoulder of the financial gold collar who is walking next to you in a suit and tell him which stocks are going to crash and which stocks are going to hit the upper limit today. Then he would turn around and take out his phone. He would then write a program on his phone and solve the uncanny valley phenomenon that had troubled programmers and filmmakers for many years. He would make the 3D idols on the computer go from data to reality. After that, he would go find Jiang Yage and Jean Shirua to sing a song together. Cough cough. The The third realm he faced in the Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup was the realm of singing. After being tortured by his own wailing and howling, Qin Guang, who was tone-deaf and had negative talent, finally embarked on the path of a real singer, no, a singing machine. In the blink of an eye, many years had passed. He had gone through a total of 243 Cloud Elephant Cups. From challenging the rules of the Holy Grail to challenging himself, Qin Guang's biggest discovery was that he no longer had the possibility of dying from failure. In the past he would have died 7 or 8 times in the first world within the Heavenly Spirit Cup, let alone the third world within the Cloud Elephant Cup. At most he would have died dozens of times. But now he had gone through 243 Cloud Elephant Cups in one go without dying even once. Even if there was a temporary failure, such as when he opened his mouth in the realm of singing, a rain of knives rained down from the sky. His body should have been riddled with holes, but not only did the rain of knives fail to stab him to death, they even fell directly into his body. That's right, after they fell on his head, shoulders, or hands, they were forcefully absorbed by his body, like a sponge absorbing water. At first he was worried that he would die after having so many iron elements forcefully shoved into his body. It was only when he felt bloated that a metal spear popped out from his but after he farted that he felt at ease. At that time he thought that he was having diarrhea and had an accident. In the end, before he could come to his senses, he propped himself up from the ground. This was a terrible feeling. The knives rained down from the sky and there was still a continuous stream of knives entering his body. The metal spear under his butt became thicker and thicker, pushing him higher and higher. It was only when he was dozens of meters above the ground that the rain of knives finally stopped. Only then did Qin Guang break free from the metal spear and slide down this flagpole back to the ground. Similar situations occurred in the other Cloud Elephant Cups as well. There were all sorts of strange situations, but the results were the same. Although the process was extremely tortuous, he did not die even once. The settings in the cup realm that were specially designed to punish him and take his life were completely ineffective against him. After completing the Cloud Elephant Cup, Qin Guang thought that what awaited him next would be the fourth Clear Sky Cup realm. However, after he jumped out of the space-time tunnel, what appeared in front of him was a super simplified version of the Sword Spirit Sky. Qin Guang immediately understood that after completing the current realm, he was here to clear his debts. What awaited him were 2093 middle realms of the Heavenly Spirit Seeing Cup. There was a saying that out of the 365 professions, there would be a master in every profession. The world was so big now, and there were definitely more than 365 professions in every profession. Even 3,650 professions would not be enough. The Heavenly Holy Grail focused on training all kinds of abilities that could be put into practical use. Although Qin Guang already knew a lot of them and even felt that most of them were useless, he did not have the right to refuse. The toughest pen calligraphy, brush calligraphy, the best ping pong, the best glass marble, the best trash collection, the best professional sewer dredging, the best fruit platter. In short, in the 2093 Clear Sky Cups realm, Qin Guang's worldview was greatly impacted. If he had not experienced it himself, he would probably never have imagined that there were so many unorthodox methods in this world. He also remembered that Colored had once said that when the Heavenly Holy Grail created missions, it would often use the ideas in its mind as a basis. Now that he had to face more than 2,000 Clear Sky Cups in one go, he had almost squeezed out all the experience he had in the real world, which was not very long. The Heavenly Holy Grail had racked his brains just to gather enough numbers. He really regretted knowing so much. Why didn't he avoid the small advertisements on the street when he saw them? Instead, he stared at them carefully a few times. The best treatment for condyloma acuminatum, infertility. Psych. I'm really actually quite broken down. Chapter 1296. In any case, regardless of whether these skills and abilities were meaningful or not, it took Qin Guang a long time to complete the 2093 middle realm of the Heavenly Spirit Cup. Thankfully, the strongest ability that he feared the most didn't appear. Otherwise, he would have died from anal prolapse. After that, he didn't have any time to rest. What awaited him were the 727 middle realms of the Heavenly Spirit Cup. Compared to the first level, the second level of the world in the cup covered a larger area, and the training ability was also more concise. For example, the previously separate hard brush calligraphy and brush calligraphy were directly summarized into one word in the one-line sky, calligraphy. Under the conditions of the one-line skies cup, Qin Guang, who had already mastered it, didn't need to stick to hard brush or soft brush, or even if he didn't have a brush at all. As long as he wanted to leave traces of calligraphy on a surface, whatever he took out would be very artistic and powerful. The strongest table tennis was also upgraded to the strongest small ball game. Not only did it include table tennis, badminton, tennis, dodgeball, as long as it was a small ball he could play it. He had mastered the piano in the past, and in the one-line Sky Cup, the heavenly Holy Grail simply made his skills more comprehensive. After some hard training, he became proficient in all musical instruments. Not only did he have the piano, but he also had the electronic organ, the zither, the moon zither, the violin, the cello, the harmonica, and even the horsehead zither, as well as the big harp that the mermaid hugged in her arms. This heavenly Holy Grail was also very practical. As long as there was the word musical in its name, it would be accepted in the one-line Sky Cup. In fact, the order was already reversed. In the previous Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup, he had already learned all kinds of musical instruments, including but not limited to wind instruments, plucked instruments, percussion instruments, string instruments, and so on. Although there were musical instruments, there were also mouth-blowing instruments, and there were even unorthodox instruments like the accordion. However, Qin Guang had been exposed to all kinds of musical instruments before, and he had even obtained the strongest certification that surpassed ISO 9001 in the cup realm. Now that he had changed the classification of the second stage of one-line Sky, it was not completely meaningless. Instead, he realized that after the certification of Cloud Elephant Sky, he actually had 2 more certifications of one-line Sky, further strengthening his training to the extreme. In the past, no matter what skills he learned, most of them relied on the force-feeding method of teaching to hammer the skill to the extreme. However, after training in Spirit Sky, One-Line Sky, and Cloud Elephant Sky, any skill that had overlapping training brought him an indescribable strengthening effect. If the results of the first level of training in the Sky of Seeing Spirit could be said to be close to the Tao, then the training in the Sky of Frontiers would become the natural Tao, and the training in the Sky of Clouds would become the Tao that could connect with the gods. Layer after layer of training allowed his achievements in a certain matter to be continuously stacked, and in the end, it formed a magnified effect. In the past, when he played the piano, he could use the tempestuous rhythm to make people worship him, unable to look directly at him. But now, after a long period of study, his talent in music, which was originally equivalent to the standard of an ordinary person or even worse, had been unleashed to the extreme. He had reached another realm. As the saying goes, the stupid bird flies first. Even the stupidest bird would be able to fly to a place where others would be left in the dust. In the past, Qin Guang had boasted that his talent in music was 0, so he had never called himself a master pianist. He had always thought of himself as a craftsman, because he could only play existing songs and not compose them. But now he was different. After going through the repeated special training in the first 3 stages of the Holy Grail, his talent in music had been infinitely magnified. The current him had long since mastered the skills of composing music, and could even raise his hand to play super music that no one had ever done before on the piano. Whether it was impassioned, slow and melodious, or passionate or cold and strange music styles, he could easily play them all. These songs were guaranteed to be unique in human history, and any one of them was enough to drive pianists all over the world crazy. They would have to spend at least 10 years or at most several decades to study and analyze them, and then they would discover to their shock that this was actually the next stage of art. However, musical skills were only one of the more than 200 major skills that he had mastered. Under the more than 200 major skills, he still had more than 700 minor skills, and more than 2,100 minor skills. In human history, there had been many fields of learning such as literature and art, painting and art, architecture, military affairs, philosophy, governance, engineering, science, and so on. In modern times, various subjects had been further expanded, and any comprehensive university would have dozens of majors. For example, the Gokyo University that Qin Guang studied in was a representative example. Further down, literature and art could also be divided into poems, songs, novels, plays, operas, and so on. These kinds of classifications would also diverge according to region and era. For example, Shakespeare's plays and the operas of the Yuan dynasty were 2 completely different things. Further back, Homer's epics and Chu Yuan's songs of the South were 2 completely different things. As for scientific knowledge, it was even more complicated. In universities, there were all kinds of basic subjects such as materials science, chemistry, mechanics, computer science, physics, chemistry, and so on, or environmental science, which was a very comprehensive but very specific branch subject. Each of these subjects was enough for a person to exhaust their entire life to learn, and yet still not see the end. Through the previous 3 stages of the world within Cup, Qin Guang had grasped all sorts of knowledge in his mind. At this moment he was standing at the pinnacle of human history in every field. It could even be said that he had completely surpassed this era by 1,000 years. Even if the current human beings exhausted the power of the entire earth, exhausted the current 7 billion people, in the future they might reach the wisdom of 10 or even 20 billion people, it would still take a whole 1,000 years to catch up to his current knowledge. Fortunately, he could not find anyone to compare himself to. Otherwise, just the pretentiousness that emanated from his entire body would be enough to make others explode on the spot. Qin Guang felt that there was something wrong with his brain. Of course, he had always been abnormal. Otherwise, how could his brain contain so many memories, so much knowledge and knowledge? Even if it was forced in through force feeding, there was still a limit to the capacity of a person's brain. No matter how complex and unimaginable the structure of the brain was, connecting one hard drive after another with brackets and building a data center the size of a football field would still exceed the limits of the human brain's structure, and it would not be able to contain so much knowledge. But now, after the frenzied training of the first 3 worlds of the heavenly Holy Grail, Qin Guang realized that there was no limit to his brain, and he even had a very strong sense of hunger. He wanted more. Even though his brain already contained almost all the knowledge since the birth of human civilization, he was still not satisfied. When the 4th world of the heavenly Holy Grail, which was also the true world within the heavenly Holy Grail, appeared in front of him, he suddenly came to a realization. It was no wonder that when he wanted to practice martial arts, the heavenly Holy Grail would give him the power realm of the heavenly Holy Grail and the worldview framework of the 8th heaven, which was also the realm of true force. It turned out that the first 3 worlds of the heavenly Holy Grail were simply to build a foundation for himself. Only after reaching the 4th world, the heavenly Holy Grail, would he truly be able to break away from humanity and evolve in a supernatural direction. Strictly speaking, inner strength martial arts were already a supernatural power, but there were also great limitations in the past. There were very few people who could master it, and the degree of mastery was not deep either. In the real world, reaching the master realm like Wenwen was already the limit. It was only when Qin Guang himself appeared that this limit was broken. The 4th world, the heavenly Holy Grail, had truly opened up a completely different picture of him from the past. At the same time, Qin Guang's horizons were instantly raised to another level. Sitting cross-legged in the space-time tunnel, the various events of the past flashed across the depths of his mind. He could not help but sigh to himself. Although he had been at the lowest end of the first 3 heavens for a very long period of time, he had made his way through the many worlds within the cups, especially the last few times he came into contact with the Protoss, and the incomparably long period of time after he was smacked to death by the Master God of Chaos. All of these stacked together to build such a solid foundation for him today. No wonder the Protoss could project themselves. That laughable principal will of the heavenly Holy Grail actually thought that he had schemed against me? Little did you know it was the heavenly Holy Grail that let you in. Chapter 1297. The spacetime tunnel leading to the 4th realm of the Azure Sky Cup seemed to be extraordinarily long, at least twice as long as before. Only when he floated to the last half of the tunnel did Qin Guang finally understand the reason. Before he fell into the Azure Sky Cup, which was set to be an interstellar world, Qin Guang could vaguely see a huge flat surface floating next to the newly formed Azure Sky Cup. If the Azure Sky Cup, which was created by the heavenly Holy Grail, appeared to be a basketball-sized sphere in the void, then the huge inclined plane floating next to it was definitely larger than the Pacific Ocean. Qin Guang understood with a single glance at this flat shape. Isn't this my true martial world? It seemed that after he had completely fused with the heavenly Holy Grail, he had the ability to jump out of the Azure Sky Cup and stand outside to observe the small world. Sure enough, the Azure Sky Cup was worthy of being the 8th realm of the immortal heavens. Although the true force domain was only born in the 4th realm, its world structure and size far exceeded the normal 4th realm of the Azure Sky Cup. Qin Guang looked down again, and sure enough he saw more than 2,000 stars below. Every one of them was the Azure Sky Cup, which had been created by the heavenly Holy Grail. He looked up and saw a pool of water that had been inexplicably cut into a circle above the azure sky cup. Qin Guang's mind moved and he actually refused to immediately enter the next azure sky cup. Instead he jumped out and floated in the void. He floated up to the pool of water that was suspended in the air. There were no containers around, but this pool of water was in a regular circle. Using the true force domain as a reference, the total area of this pool of water should be 3 times that of the true force domain, and its depth was equivalent to the Earth's mantle. There were a lot of dust floating on the surface of the water, which were actually small islands. Qin Guang focused his eyes, and his eyes continued to expand like a magnified Google map. The islands on the surface of the water gradually became clear in his eyes. He was staring at the sage's island where his statue stood. Sage Right Chen's statue was brand new. Every once in a while the people in the Shuzhou Sea would renovate this statue. Annie and Brooke were nowhere to be seen on the Sage Island. They were probably reincarnated. Who knows which corner of the Sea of Moments they were cultivating. On the other hand, Qin Guang saw old Bob donning luxurious clothes and giving orders in the plaza. Many people were busy under his orders, and it seemed like he was intending to renovate the plaza. Old Bob looked at the statue from time to time, his eyes still filled with admiration. It seemed that even though many years had passed and he had died and been reborn countless times, perhaps even losing his memories for many lifetimes in between, wasting his life away like an ordinary person, old Bob was still able to recover his memories from time to time. He knew who it was that turned him from a vagrant at the bottom of the Sea of Moments into the high priest of the Sage Temple. Suddenly, old Bob's body trembled as he turned to look into the depths of the void. All he saw was a blue sky with white clouds. A few seagulls were flying happily in the sky. In that instant he felt as if he was being watched. This was a very familiar gaze that made him feel warm and intoxicated in the depths of his heart. This feeling had been lost for a long time, but it was unforgettable, just like when Great Sage Right stood by his side before he left. In the void, Qin Guang smiled knowingly. He didn't expect that even though he was outside the world, old Bob would still be able to sense his gaze. It seemed that even though he had left for a long time, the influence he left behind in the Sea of Moments was still strong, and hadn't weakened with the passage of time. Not only that, Qin Guang also saw a statue on the other side of the island that made him feel particularly embarrassed. It was the statue of the strongest pile driver, built on the ruins of the Sage Island that he and Annie had destroyed. The people of the Sea of Moments had reclaimed the island and rebuilt it, and 1 billion years ago they had created this statue. This was the work of Lady Annie. According to what Annie had said at the time when she woke up, she received a message in her dreams from the great sage who had gone to a higher plane. He had encountered a big problem and needed help from the people of the Sea of Moments. This help required the people of the Sea of Moments to provide him with the power of faith and worship. In order to transmit this power to him across the plane barrier, a total of 3 mediums were needed. One of them was the place where he had played the piano for the first time in the Sea of Moments. There the strong had rebuilt a statue of the piano god. The second was his statue on the square of the Sage Island. As long as people continuously prayed and cultivated under the statue, the willpower in their souls would be continuously transmitted through the statue, providing assistance to the great sage. The third medium was this newly built pile driver statue. Well, this was actually a giant penis. According to Lady Annie, this thing's body structure was exactly the same as the great sage's. That angry dragon with its head raised towards the sky, that sinister appearance with blue veins popping out, it all showed how terrifying and outstanding the great sage's ability in this aspect was. It was no wonder that the two of them had frequently destroyed the Sage Island. Their battle prowess was truly unimaginable. If the people of the Sea of Moments wanted to provide assistance to the great sage, they needed to stand under the statue and continuously worship the great sage's ability in that aspect. That's right, it was the legendary super strong worship. Especially when it came to girls, the effective worship was the strongest, and the more help they could provide to the great sage. Well, I have to add one more, it's best if it's a pure girl. As for why? Standing in the void, Qin Guang's face was slightly red. Because in a sense, the Sea of Moments was a world born from his will. Even though the rules of this world weren't complete, it was definitely in line with his subconscious. This meant that even though he was known as a womanizer, he was actually a selfish and shameless Virgo. As for the willpower and faith provided by the people of the Sea of Moments through the three mediums, it was actually the same as the faith provided by the statue sect on Earth through the 10 statues. Even though the quality wasn't as good as the people on Earth, it was superior in quantity. It was also an important part of his body when he revived. Thinking of this, Qin Guang felt even more ashamed. Ever since he left the Sea of Moments, even though Qin Guang had looked into the Sea of Moments time and time again, his real body had never returned. He didn't make any contributions or help to the people of this world, but the people of the Sea of Moments, after going through such a long period of time and countless reincarnations, their worship and reverence towards him didn't weaken at all, but instead became even stronger. Now they were even giving their all for him without any complaints or regrets. Even though their lives were born because of him, the shackles of fate that shrouded their heads were also existences that he had forcefully placed on their heads. If one day he could use the identity of the transcendent Holy Grail to transcend all shackles at that time, he would think of a way to forcefully raise the level of the Sea of Moments to another level. At the very least, he would make this plane reach the same level as Earth. This could be considered as compensation to the people of this plane. Qin Guang's gaze left the Sea of Moments and looked up again. Above him there were two different shapes of space floating. Taking into account the size of the Pacific Ocean of the true martial domain again, the volume of these two spaces reflected in the void of the transcendent Holy Grail was simply too large to be calculated. Qin Guang knew that the ellipsoidal shape of these two planes should be the Earth universe after merging with the real world. The other plane structure should be the world of fate that he had a glimpse of in the past. On both sides of these two planes, there were 7 plane balls that still seemed to be in a state of chaos. Now these plane balls were round, but Qin Guang understood that it was only because these 7 plane worlds hadn't been activated by him yet. After activation they would take on a real shape like the real world and the life realm. They could be polygonal crystals, or they could be layers of floating islands, or they could be a large space in the shape of a 5-speed electric fan. The biggest gain from this discovery was that it allowed him to clearly understand one thing. There were exactly 9 special worlds like the real world and the world of fate. Although he had expected it before, it was better to see it with his own eyes now. In addition, the distribution of these 9 special worlds in a circle looked exactly the same as the 9 ancient wells he had seen in the true martial realm before his death. In other words, the 9 immortals' peaks of the Master God of Chaos were placed in the same order and position. It seemed that the 9 stars' interlocking formation must have a very special meaning in the endless heavenly realm. After confirming this discovery, Qin Guang once again magnified his gaze like an infinitely magnifying glass, and slowly landed on the Earth in the real universe. With his complete resurrection, the originally still time on the Earth began to flow again. The millions of human players that were sealed in the true martial domain also successfully returned to the real world with the help of the 9 ancient wells that had reappeared. Of course, these 9 ancient wells weren't the 9 immortals' peak, but the reactivated transcendent Holy Grail was a game item that repaired itself according to Qin Guang's own subconscious. However, 2 people were missing. Qin Guang and Wenwen didn't return. Qin Guang didn't return because he had completely merged with the transcendent Holy Grail. As for Wenwen, it was because she was completely dead from her soul to her imprint. Her body in the real world had completely disintegrated the moment time began to flow again. A trace of sorrow flashed through Qin Guang's heart, but he quickly adjusted his state of mind. After his rebirth, he had been madly polished by nearly 3,000 small worlds, and his entire soul and body had been completely reconstructed for 1 billion years. His state of mind had long undergone a fundamental change. Even though Wenwen was now dead, as long as he could achieve his goal, it wouldn't be difficult for him to suppress and transcend the shackles of the endless heavenly realm and reconstruct Wenwen's life after turning back time. In addition, Qin Guang also realized that he seemed to have left the scope of the game system. He had clearly left the Earth, but the game did not stop. Instead, it appeared on the Earth at a faster rate than before. In addition, after nearly half of the players died in the world of jumping off the building, the total number of human players had been replenished by 10 million in the next mission that appeared immediately after. Although these people were all newcomers, they were equally talented. With the help of the veteran players, the human players were still able to make their way in the game's mission space. For a time, Qin Guang was speechless. From the looks of it, there were 2 completely parallel game systems in the Transcendent Holy Grail. One was his own world in the cup and the other was the game space for human players and Protoss players. Chapter 1298. Previously he had thought that the game system of the human players would have either collapsed or stopped after he had cleared the world and cup in batches. However, it seemed that things were not as simple as he thought. The two systems could exist in parallel and complement each other. Qin Guang used the Heavenly Holy Grail to investigate the process of several quests. He discovered that the game system provided the human and Protoss players with a test that was completely based on the order in which he had cleared the levels. Up until now, the players from both sides had cleared more than 10 World and Cup, while the players from both sides had cleared 5 or 6 World and Cup. They had followed the order in which he had cleared the World and Cloud Elephant Cup. The World and Cloud Elephant Cup was extremely difficult. Both the human and Protoss players had suffered heavy losses. However, the setting of the Heavenly Holy Grail seemed to require the number of players to be constant. Even if the human players lost millions of players, the next time the World and Cup was intermittently opened, the total number of players would be replenished to 9,999,999. It was the same for the Protoss players. When Qin Guang and the Master God of Chaos met, the 3,333,333 Protoss projections from the Celestial Realm had all perished. However, they were replenished with the next quest. After completing the Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup, they would return to the Seeing Spirit Sky level Cup world in the Cup to challenge it. Qin Guang estimated that after all the players had cleared the World and Cloud Elephant Cup, it would be easier for them to return to the Sky of Spirits level. This situation was very similar to his own situation. He would first give the players a difficult quest to help them grow, and then send them back to the beginner's village to strengthen their foundations. After they had completed the 2093 World and Cloud Elephant Cup, they would directly jump to the Sky of Spirits level, the 4th World and Cloud Elephant Cup, just like himself. When that time came, the players would probably suffer heavy losses again. However, Qin Guang could not even protect himself now. He could only watch and could not continue to protect the human players. However, judging from the recent developments, he felt a lot more at ease. The performance of the human players was not as bad. Many died, but there were also many who kept leveling up. There were a total of 7 billion people on Earth. Up until now, every realm in the Cup had lost an average of 2 million players. Therefore, even if the players in the Heavenly Holy Grail trials could not be repeated and dying once was equivalent to being completely eliminated, the humans on Earth would still be able to endure the realm in the Cup 3,500 times. Even if the number of casualties fluctuated, there would still be at least 500 casualties left. In the later stages of the world within a Cup, even if the difficulty increased, the players' abilities would continue to improve. As a result, the casualty rate wouldn't necessarily increase. In fact, it might even decrease. In addition, Qin Guang had a feeling that perhaps the fundamental purpose of the Heavenly Holy Grail's setting was to make all humans become players for once. He also discovered something else. When he was resurrected in the Holy Grail after 1 billion years, the time in the outside world did not stop. The humans who were extracted to become players did not show any obvious abnormalities in the outside world. Their previous identity, their personality in the real world, and their social circle did not change at all in these few months. At first, Qin Guang thought that the Heavenly Holy Grail had set up a substitute for every player who was selected. In these few months, the substitute would take over the player's original body and play the role of the player in real life. He thought that these substitute consciousnesses were not real humans. They should be virtual consciousnesses derived from the Heavenly Holy Grail. They were similar to artificial intelligence but more advanced and could be passed off as real. However, when Qin Guang truly investigated what had happened in the past, especially after reading the reports about himself, he changed his mind. He seemed to have been mistaken about one thing. When he entered the realm in the Cup, although his main consciousness had indeed left his body, it did not mean that his body had become an empty shell without a soul. To be precise, his consciousness was split into two. The dominant part entered the Heavenly Holy Grail, while the subconscious and the surface layer of consciousness remained in his body. He did not realize this before because the time in the outside world had almost stopped when he entered the realm in the Cup. The time he stayed in there was too short. The outside world did not have time to change and his body did not need to do anything before he came out. This time was different. He and many other players were trapped in the realm in the Cup. The main consciousness had left his body for too long, and the time in the outside world continued to move forward. The secondary consciousness had no choice but to take over the command of the body. However, this secondary consciousness did not know that it was secondary at all. It would occasionally feel an inexplicable sense of emptiness. Now that the players had successfully left, the main consciousness had returned and completely devoured and fused with the secondary consciousness. Of course, this included the memories of this period. During the process of fusion, the secondary consciousness did not feel anything. It did not even know that it was being fused. The main consciousness, on the other hand, had some feelings. It even felt a little strange. It was not sure if it was really itself during that period of time. However, this was not a big deal. In any case, Qin Guang's secondary consciousness did not have any inappropriate thoughts. In fact, he was like a saint. In the past few months, he had not done anything with anyone of the opposite sex. He was rather pure. Now everyone else had gone back, but he was completely gone. It seemed that when he died under the palm of the Master God of Chaos, his body in the real world also disintegrated into nothingness. Fortunately, the memory of his resurrection was transmitted over at the same time. Otherwise, he would have lost a part of it. When Qin Guang checked this part of the memory, he felt ashamed of his subconscious's decency. The secondary consciousness was the most perfect actor in this dimension. Even though the secondary consciousness would never have any emotional fluctuations, like a pool of stagnant water in the eyes of others, it was almost no different from itself. Could even fool the people closest to it. This perfect control left Qin Guang in awe. Now, why did this absolute calm state of mind feel so familiar? Qin Guang's body trembled. Wasn't this exactly the same as the character displayed by the electronic voice in the Holy Grail? Could it be that the spirit of the Holy Grail was my subconscious from the very beginning? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. Now that he had completely fused with the Grail, the original spirit of the Holy Grail had disappeared. Logically speaking, since the Holy Grail was known as a supreme artifact, it must have a spirit. The spirit of a supreme artifact had to be at the same level as a god emperor or even stronger. There was no reason for it to be swallowed and replaced so easily. It should at least put up a fight, right? But the truth was that he did not feel anything during this process. It was as simple and casual as opening his eyes after waking up every morning. This meant that the spirit of the Holy Grail did not resist at all. Or perhaps, the moment his consciousness was awakened, the spirit of the Holy Grail was absorbed seamlessly. Just like how the main consciousness of players swallowed the secondary consciousness when they returned to the real world. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, he quickly convinced himself. The more Qin Guang thought about it, the more he felt that it made sense. Then another thought appeared in his mind. If this theory was correct, then there would be a paradox. According to Lazuli, the Holy Grail had existed for an unknown number of years. The spirit of the Holy Grail should have existed for roughly the same amount of time as the Holy Grail, so it must be an ancient antique among antiques. But it had only been a little more than 20 years since he was born. This was very unreasonable and unscientific. I haven't even been born yet, but my secondary consciousness was already born. Is my subconscious so capable? Why don't I ascend to the heavens? Wait a minute. Could it be that I was originally the reincarnation of an almighty being from the endless realm of the gods? It was impossible for me to reincarnate. After all, the levels of the planes are different. But there was another possibility, and that was that I was originally a powerhouse from the endless realm of the gods. Then, that's right, that must be it. Since the endless realm of the gods was also a cage, then with the temper of the old man he would definitely not be able to tolerate it. So I chose to first create this Holy Grail, then self-destruct on the spot. Then I descended to this special Earth universe and used the Holy Grail to cause trouble. My ultimate goal was to break free from the Holy Grail and at the same time cause trouble with the origin of the God realm and then transcend the God realm. No wonder Lazuli, who is a divine emperor, is so friendly to a loser like me. It's obvious that Lazuli is my old lover from the God realm. Lazuli, am I right? He shouted in his heart. But no one paid attention to him. Lazuli didn't move at all. It didn't matter. Right now the holes in his brain were working crazily. He was analyzing everything that had happened since he obtained the Holy Grail at an extremely fast speed. No wonder Divine Emperor Yu Ting and the others said that he was a traitor. No wonder they inexplicably thought that he would cause serious damage to the endless realm of the gods. So things should have been like this from the beginning. How much of a genius did I have to be in the past to be able to create such a tough setting like the Holy Grail? Even if the origin of the God realm wanted to kill me, it could only follow my rules and find trouble with me in the Holy Grail. In the end, it was still plotted against by me. In addition, if I was really the reincarnation of some almighty being, then the memory of my previous life should be very strong, and my will should be indestructible. But why can't I remember anything until now? Am I still me? However, Qin Guang was baffled by this. He really had 10,000 questions that he wanted to get answers from Lazuli, but she didn't move at all. Forget it, the boat will cross the bridge when it comes to it. After daydreaming for a while, Qin Guang turned his attention back to the game mission that many human and Protoss players were participating in. He always felt that there were more articles in this game space that was parallel to the world in the cup. Maybe when he completely understood the relationship between this game and the world in the cup, he would understand the true mystery. Chapter 1299. Qin Guang's eyebrows were tightly knitted together. He was constantly analyzing the current situation in his mind. Clearly, time had been falsified once again. His resurrection had taken a total of 1 billion years in the realm of true force, which was about 4 months in the real world. Then, during these 4 months, all the human players should have been trapped in the realm of true force, and the Protoss players should have been wiped out. However, according to the real history that he had found, during these 4 months, neither the human players nor the Protoss players had stopped the progress of the game quest. The Protoss players did not repeat at all. Yu Ting and 8 Directions who had died before did not reappear. Instead, they were replaced by the newly selected God Emperor and many low-level Protoss. The human players were partially repeated. The players who were still alive in the realm of true force when Qin Guang disappeared also existed in the following game quests. Those who had died were replaced by others. This meant that during this period of time, there were paradoxes that contradicted each other and the logic was in chaos. Whether it was the consciousness in the realm of true force or the consciousness participating in the world in a cup, they should all be the same main consciousness. The main consciousness of the players in the realm of true force existed in 2 timelines at the same time. One of them was trapped in the realm of true force, living in that huge world step by step, participating in the natural evolution of the realm of true force from all aspects. The other existed in the real world, following the previous settings, participating in the game quests every once in a while, competing with the Protoss players and completing the game's quests. This was obviously a very unreasonable situation. It was as if 2 identical parallel worlds had been created out of thin air. Or it was as if a road had abruptly branched off into 2 different directions in the process of extending forward. It was just like the cars driving on the fork and the passengers inside were completely overlapping, but the scenery on both sides of the road was very different. When the players in the realm of true force returned to the real world, they absorbed 2 kinds of memories about the real world. One of them was the player's secondary consciousness waiting for the end of the quest in a daze for the past 4 months. The other was the main consciousness of the other timeline, participating in the game quests at a normal pace for 4 months. Logically speaking, these 2 kinds of memories should conflict with each other and even cause schizophrenia. However, the reality was that these 2 completely different and contradictory memories easily merged together without any hindrance. In the player's newly formed memories, the billions of years they had spent in the realm of true force were compressed into an extremely short period of time. This period of time was extremely short, infinitely close to nothing. If time was a line, it had length but no width. However, the compressed memory was only equivalent to a dot in real life. A dot had no length and was infinitely close to 0. The overlapping memories in real life were cleverly connected together so that all the players who participated in the true martial domain in the real world at the same time could live in the outside world at the same time, but at the same time enter the game world regularly. It should have been impossible, but under the control of the Holy Grail that transcended the rules of the real universe, it was truly so ingenious and seamless that it connected seamlessly. Apart from Qin Guang, who was a bystander, no one noticed anything unusual. He had been delayed outside the space-time tunnel for too long. The suction force from the 4th layer of the realm of Clear Sky Cup was getting stronger and stronger. At first it was effortless for Qin Guang to resist it. But after a long time this force kept increasing, and now it was enough to pull down microscopic particles from the surface of his body. He thought that since he had already investigated enough, he would continue to study the situation of the human players after he completed this realm of Clear Sky Cup. Logically speaking, now that Qin Guang had stepped onto the broad road of breaking through at the speed of light, the life or death of the human players was actually not important to him. But he could not let it go. He did not know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Even his species had changed. Perhaps only his appearance was still that of a human, but his internal body structure and energy composition had long since left the scope of human beings on Earth. But deep in his soul he still retained his humanity. But according to Qin Guang's observation of the Protoss, the real gods should not have too many emotions. Even if they did, they could only be emotions that were forcibly solidified in the depths of their hearts to achieve a certain goal. That was not called humanity but divinity. This meant that the current Qin Guang had the body of a god and the personality of a human. This was obviously very incongruous and even contradictory and conflicting. For example, the lifespan of a god was usually very long. But even gods of the same level of strength would often differ greatly in terms of their lifespan. If a god was slightly stronger or if the rules they controlled were slightly different, the difference in the length of their lifespan would usually be several times or even dozens of times. This was not the difference between 10 years and 40 or 50 years, but the difference between hundreds of millions of years and tens of billions of years. The gods were extremely indifferent when it came to emotions. They could easily withstand the impact of emotions and would not feel pain because they had to watch their relatives, friends, or descendants grow old and die. They would also not feel melancholy because the enemy in their life did not lose to them but lost to time. When the lifespan of an intelligent life exceeded a certain limit, it was impossible for emotions that were close to human to survive. Humans, whose average lifespan was less than 80 years, would never be able to understand the philosophy of life of high-level intelligent life in the universe that could easily live for thousands or even tens of thousands of years, let alone gods whose lifespan was easily measured in units of hundreds of millions. Not to mention true eternity, even a life that was close to eternity was completely beyond the understanding of humans. When time was stretched almost indefinitely, many things that were common to ordinary people would slowly become difficult to understand. For example, family, love, friendship. These many emotions that ran through almost everyone's life were very meaningless to the Protoss. In the long history of the endless heavenly realm, Qin Guang felt that it was very likely that only he and Liuli in his previous life had developed feelings that were similar to human feelings for each other. Otherwise, what could explain why Liuli was willing to give up her godly position and be sealed in the heavenly Holy Grail despite being a god emperor like the others? Thinking of this, Qin Guang's mind was once again filled with the image of a person that had completely disappeared for a long time. That's right, it was the deer cry fruit. He did not know when it started, but the huge deer cry fruit was no longer in Cloud City. If he remembered correctly, she should be Liuli's best friend. In the past, Qin Guang did not feel that there was anything wrong with this. But that was because he did not understand the Protoss well enough. Now that he had become a combination of divinity and humanity, and had seen many projections of the Protoss with his own eyes, Qin Guang found something strange. Would the gods really have best friends? Liuli and he were already two anomalies. Now there was a third anomaly from the heavenly realm, and it just so happened that she was also trapped in the heavenly Holy Grail. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? Before he could get the answer in his mind, the world in front of Qin Guang suddenly rotated, and he finally and thoroughly descended into the realm in a cup of this mission test. The specific requirements of the mission also appeared in his mind at the same time. It was indeed worthy of being called the realm in a cup of the heavenly Holy Grail. After reaching this level, the strengthening ability provided by the heavenly Holy Grail had completely exceeded the scope of understanding of ordinary humans, just like inner strength. Is this realm in a cup supposed to enhance my creativity? Qin Guang muttered to himself. He felt very strange. In a sense, he felt that the level of the ability of creativity was a little too low, not worthy of the level of the heavenly Holy Grail. After all, as long as one was a normal human being, he or she would more or less have some creativity and inspiration. For example, if a person was asked to take something from a high place and his or her hands could not reach it, he or she could turn around and think of moving a stool at the side. This kind of thing did not need to be taught by others. It was the most basic manifestation of creativity and inspiration. Self-heuristic application of tools was one of the foundations that distinguished human beings from other animals. But in another sense, the scope of application of the ability of creativity was perhaps too wide. For example, in scientific research, when a problem that had puzzled the entire human race for countless years was solved, It would often be a burst of genius inspiration after a long period of accumulation. Going even deeper, if a deity emperor in the endless god realm was given infinite creativity, then whether it was trying to figure out the rules or even trying to touch the laws, it would be useful. Creativity was a simple word, but its effects could be big or small. From small things to big things like the origin of the universe and the principle of planes. This kind of ability appeared in the realm in the fourth cup, which was very unexpected to Qin Guang. Although inner strength was mysterious, it was after all an ability with a definite range and attribute. Even if there was no upper limit to its growth, at least it had a mature system that was easy to understand. But creativity was too big, it could not be quantified, and the effects it could display could also be small or big. But thinking so much was useless in the end. Very soon he found out the first test that he had to face. Create a set of irregular but significant symbols. At this moment, the place where he was standing was no longer an island or a plain like before, but an endless real void. There was nothing, not even the most basic and microscopic particles. For example, the various basic rules that maintain the operation of the universe on Earth, such as the 4 fundamental forces, the limit of the speed of light, the theoretical foundation of the composition of matter, and even the rules of the propagation and diffraction of energy waves. All of these rules that were involved in maintaining the stability of the universe did not exist in this realm in the cup. It was complete and utter nothingness. So the limit of creativity is for me to personally participate in the creation of a plane? Starting from the creation of symbols? Qin Guang muttered to himself, but his mind already had the ready-made memory of the heavenly Holy Grail creating a plane. This kind of thing did not require any creativity at all, right? Suddenly his heart felt something and his eyes lit up. His right hand trembled irregularly, and a stream of energy that was a combination of divine power, inner strength, the power of the Holy Grail, and mysterious power slowly flowed out from his fingertip, drawing an extremely complicated symbol in the void. This power was very familiar to Qin Guang when he was in the transition space. This was the power that surged in his body. Qin Guang could understand the first 3 types. Only the last 4th type was completely outside of his knowledge system. He originally thought that after his rebirth, these powers would disappear, and he should have the same pure divine power as the gods, just like the earth element of the earth exploder that completely disappeared after being devoured. But now it seemed that his judgment was wrong. This mixed power was the most stubborn existence. Previously he named this mixed power the new version of inner strength, but now it seemed that he had named it wrongly. So, what was the meaning behind this set of symbols? Squinting his eyes, Qin Guang focused on the symbol diagram in front of him. The notification that he had passed the stage had already sounded in his mind, indicating that he had reached the assessment standard of the realm in the cup. He was purely drawing without any conscious thought. If this could be considered creativity, wouldn't it be a little too childish? Chapter 1300. What exactly did I create? I don't even know myself, alright. Creativity and whatnot, shouldn't it only count if I create something useful? While he was still complaining in his mind, the second task arrived. Create 2 sets of symbols that have no pattern and are of great significance. If complaining was also a form of cultivation, Qin Guang felt that he had long since surpassed the main gods. Why don't you give me something a little different? The first test had 1 set, the second test had 2 sets. Then wouldn't the third test have 3 sets? He raised his hand to draw another set of talismans, and the effect was exactly the same as the first test. Even Qin Guang himself could not understand what he drew, but it just so happened that it was recognized by the realm within a cup. Looking at the 3 piles of symbols floating in the air in front of him, Qin Guang's eyes widened as he stared at them, racking his brains to try and discern some meaning from them. But he quickly gave up on this futile idea. These were all random drawings that he had drawn in a completely unconscious state, and there was no way they could have any real meaning. This situation and this scene even made him question the strictness of the heavenly Holy Grail. If this could be called creativity, then even a newborn could have endless creativity. Could the third test really be, create 3 sets? Alright, you win, I concede. You're clearly using the excuse of creativity to toy with me, aren't you? You say it's creation, but what you're doing is completely meaningless nonsense. It's probably because I've fused with the heavenly Holy Grail, so I've tarnished this great divine weapon. The more Qin Guang thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. But he quickly shook his head violently, indicating that he could not approve of it. Otherwise, wouldn't that mean that he was admitting that he was a fool? This was clearly not harmonious. Just like that, when he drew all the way to the 10th set, there was finally a change. Create a set of compositions that are full of beauty. Qin Guang snapped his fingers. Finally, it was upgraded. If it was in the past, it would be difficult for him to understand what it meant to be full of beauty. However, the present was different from the past. After going through the spirit-seeing sky, one-line sky, and cloud elephant sky, which were interspersed with sketching, oil painting, watercolor painting, traditional Chinese painting, computer graphics, sculpture, relief sculpture, and other arts-related special training, Qin Guang's attainments in art could be said to be number one throughout the ages. If he wanted to, he could easily create a painting with just a wave of his hand. If he took it out, it would be comparable to Van Gogh, Da Vinci, Zhang Daqian, Qi Baishi, or even Tang Bohu. Although times were changing and people's preferences and fashions would more or less change, the pursuit of beauty was a concept that had been engraved in human genes since ancient times. Whether a painting was beautiful or not, whether a person was beautiful or not, although there were differences between the East and the West, they were similar in many aspects. Qin Guang even believed that the aesthetics of the Protoss were basically the same as that of humans. The reason was very simple. The god emperors he had met, whether it was Yu Ting or Ba Feng, were all considered handsome. There was no need to mention Liuli's beauty. When he first saw her, Qin Guang, who was still a mortal at that time, was almost killed by her beauty. The Protoss had the ability to adjust their appearance. If a god felt that their image was not good, even if it was not a big change, at least a small adjustment would be inevitable. From this, it could be seen that the beauty of a god was basically the same as that of a human. Qin Guang spent at least half an hour thinking in his mind. He raised his hand and used his fingers to surge energy, using lines to draw a perfect combination of the golden ratio and symmetrical Chinese redbud hexagonal shape. Once this picture was released, it would instantly become popular all over the world. Whether it was used to make a logo or as an accompanying picture, it would not be a problem. It could even be directly used as a skill icon in an online game. That would definitely be a design that people would be obsessed with, and people would be crazy enough to copy it. Certification failed. Redeemer, please recompose the picture. 9 chances remaining. When this sentence appeared in his mind, Qin Guang almost thought that he was hallucinating. Isn't this nonsense? Things that I drew blindly passed in one try. Something that I took out with a serious composition, and you actually failed to certify it? I don't believe it. I'm the cup now and I have the final say. You have to let me pass. Then he seriously redrew it again. This time he chose the 6-pointed star, and the result was another certification failure without any suspense. Qin Guang felt a little uncomfortable. For the 3rd time he thought about it in his mind for a whole 5 hours before he carefully picked up the brush. It took him the equivalent of an entire day in the outside world to take out the finished product. But the moment he put down the brush, he received a notification that the certification had failed. Now the situation was very awkward. It couldn't be that he failed to draw seriously and could still pass blindly, right? Why don't I give it a try? I'll give it a try. Anyway, there are a total of 7 chances. This time he simply waved his arms randomly. What he drew was still completely incomprehensible to him, and he did not feel that there was any beauty in it at all. But he actually passed the certification. Qin Guang was silent. Is there something wrong with the aesthetic concept of this heavenly holy grail? I'm clearly slapping myself in the face, okay? Just the things that I've drawn now, not to mention the aesthetics of the Protoss, they don't even touch the aesthetics of the human race. What golden ratio, what symmetrical aesthetics, or otherwise, there isn't even an aesthetic of disorder. In short, it's completely meaningless. Forget it. Since the Holy Grail has gone crazy, then I'll go crazy too. Anyway, it's fine as long as I can pass. It was another very complicated round of aesthetic exploration filled with creativity. After passing 10 rounds in a row, Qin Guang had almost filled the void in front of him. He had to move again. Soon the 3rd round of creativity appeared. This time he was asked to draw a 3-dimensional aesthetic structure. Once bitten, twice shy. This time Qin Guang simply closed his eyes and emptied his mind. His right hand danced wildly in the air as if he was possessed. Then he passed the certification without any suspense. When he completed the 3-dimensional composition again, the task had a little more change. The realm in the cup finally gave him a clear goal, which was to complete a mechanical design. Of course, the requirement was also very simple. It had to conform to aesthetics. At the same time, the machine had to have the function of fetching water. At that time, Qin Guang raised his hand and drew a beautiful faucet. Then the certification failed. Soon he used the effect of imitating CAD design to draw a stable but una-aesthetic water wheel. It was just the shape of a wheel. He didn't expect that he would pass. Qin Guang gradually found the feeling. The so-called full of beauty was simply a pretense. This world of creation was purely messing around. It simply wanted him to fool himself. There was no real creativity. It was purely the graffiti of a 3-year-old. Whether it was flat or three-dimensional or even the so-called water wheel or something else, it was no different from graffiti to him now. After the water wheel was the windmill, and after the windmill was the hoe. For what felt like an infinite amount of time, Qin Guang constantly drew talismans or drawings in this world that was called the creation realm, but it seemed to have nothing to do with creation at all. It was a rather boring world. Congratulations, Redeemer, for successfully passing the world of creation. Qin Guang had no idea if the sky-piercing Holy Grail was talking to him or if it was just him talking to himself. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. Oh my God, I've unknowingly drawn so many useless things for you. Suddenly, his whole body shook and he muttered to himself, when did I draw this thing? It turned out that the countless energy trace symbols he had drawn were floating in the air in front of him, arranged in a picturesque manner from top to bottom. Standing close, he could not see the whole picture clearly, but when he retreated infinitely far away and looked around, he could shockingly see that the symbols he had drawn had piled up to form a tree. The shape was lush and layered. It looked like a Christmas tree no matter how he looked at it. How could I draw such a big tree without any meaning? Qin Guang was at a loss. The situation in front of him now reminded him of a hunting video he had seen before. A big hand was holding a pen and pointing on a piece of paper. At first it was incomprehensible, but when he was done he pulled the camera away and others could see that he had drawn a portrait of Che Guevara. At this time this was what Qin Guang felt. The tree in front of him was too realistic and the details were too accurate. Every symbol and trace he had left before constituted every stroke on the tree. Not only that, if he moved closer and magnified his vision, he could see that the fiber structure in the leaves of the tree was extremely reasonable. The random strokes that he could not understand at all and felt were meaningless could actually be perfectly integrated into the whole of the tree. There were 9 layers of the trunk from top to bottom. This situation was similar to the 9 heavens built into the heavenly Holy Grail. Could it be that this is actually the image of the Holy Grail hidden in the depths of my heart and subconscious? Qin Guang asked and answered his own question, but he did not have an answer. Although he had completed the test on the other side, the creativity realm did not seem to be in a hurry to send him out. Instead, it let him stand in the void and quietly admire his work. Another moment passed, or maybe it was a very long time. The Christmas tree floating in the void began to evolve on its own, as if winter had passed and spring had come and new leaves were blooming. Not only that, this was originally a completely chaotic void. As the tree evolved, various kinds of elementary particles gradually appeared in the void. The units of these particles were much smaller than quarks. They were born out of thin air from nothing. The birth of matter brought the arrival of the rules. After the rules evolved and took shape, they began to urge the evolution of matter. This kind of evolution was not biological evolution. Instead, it directly set the combination of a level of elementary particles so that these particles could attract or repel each other, or coiled together to form the particles of the next magnitude. The elementary particles here were not the elementary particles mentioned in the popular science books that Qin Guang read on Earth. They were just the limit of human consciousness, but not the real limit. The real limit should be called the primordial particle. The so-called primordial particle referred to the magnitude closest to nothingness. There was no classification below the primordial particle. Moreover, the distance between the primordial particles was also the true nothingness. Moreover, this particle was neither energy nor matter. It could be a concept, a strand of flux energy, a beam of light, or even a paragraph of words. It could even be a thought in Qin Guang's mind. At that time, the primordial particle had undergone an infinite number of combinations. After crossing an infinite number of magnitudes, the first quark finally began to appear from nothingness. After the quark came the various atoms and molecules in the universe like Earth. The steps to form them were much faster. The enormous tree in front of Qin Guang gradually took shape. It had the shape of a tree. Lush green leaves hung on the branches, reaching the sky and hanging down to the ground. In the middle were white clouds and air. Looking at the so-called heaven and earth continuously growing from the crown and roots of the tree, Qin Guang suddenly understood. This so-called creativity was really about creating a world out of nothing. But what was the meaning of this? This was only the fourth layer. Wasn't it too early? Wait, it seemed like the laws of this plane were still evolving. After the external environment had become the same as Earth's universe, the fusion between the particles did not stop. There were still more characteristics that were constantly being reflected. Qin Guang closed his eyes and simply used his heart to feel. He casually captured a water molecule in the air and looked at the structure of the H20. Suddenly, a layer of energy structure that was completely different from the theory of the universe on Earth was added to the structure of the H20. The water molecule began to flicker, sometimes here, sometimes there. Qin Guang suddenly opened his eyes. The water molecule that he had been observing had unexpectedly disappeared from the universe in front of him. No, it didn't really disappear. Instead, it appeared in an instant 1 year later, but in the blink of an eye, it came back again. The three-dimensional matter had been forcibly added with the nature of time. The dimension of this world of creation was higher than the three-dimensional dimension. He tried to float forward, trying to shorten the distance between him and the enormous tree. But after an unknown amount of time, the distance between him and the enormous tree did not change. It still looked as far as before. This meant that no matter which direction he moved in this dimensional space, it was equivalent to walking on the spot. This was indeed a standard four-dimensional world. But the evolution of this plane was not over yet. Chapter 1301. The development of the matter had far exceeded Qin Guang's understanding. With the limited world view and memories in his mind, he could not understand what was happening in the world within the fourth realm of the clear sky cup. Qin Guang did not know that even if colored glass, Yu Ting, or even the master god of chaos appeared here, they would not be able to understand the changes that were happening in this small plane, let alone him. Gods could indeed create their own world and even set up all sorts of complicated rules. Gods could also create infinite dimensions within their own understanding, from 3 dimensions to n dimensions. They could create as many dimensions as they wanted. However, this was only multidimensionality in name. It was a false dimension created with the endless God realm as a foundation and reference, and based on the God realm's own dimension standards. However, the fourth realm in front of Qin Guang, the creation realm of the clear sky, was different. From the moment it was born, it used Qin Guang's power and the rules that were derived by itself. Although the volume of this world was insignificant, its realm of origin was equivalent to the God realm. However, it was still evolving on its own. The sky and earth that were constantly growing at the top and bottom of the giant tree were the embodiment of the perfect evolution of this world. Qin Guang had a vague feeling that the sky and earth would continue to spread into the distance, until an infinite critical point, where the 2 planes that should have been parallel would suddenly close together. When that time came, this strange world would present 2 states. The outer wall of the creation realm was formed by 2 planes, the sky above and the earth below. In the middle stood a giant tree with 9 levels. Then, in the first state, this plane should be flat. However, if the sky and earth were closed, then this plane should be a perfect sphere. Moreover, every point in this plane was in a state of absolute stillness and movement. Just like Qin Guang's current physical body, no matter which direction he moved, he would always be in the same place. This plane had both spherical and flat states at the same time. If one wanted to prove that one of the states was wrong, then one had to reach the edge of the plane. However, the location of the edge was, in a true sense, infinitely far away. If a person or a life was in this plane, they would first have to face forever in the same place, then want to reach the boundary of the plane that was infinitely far away. This entire process required one to face 2 concepts of infinity. What is infinity times infinity? Infinity or infinity multiplied by infinity, which is greater? This question alone could not be answered, not to mention that the creation world that Qin Guang was in was constantly evolving and perfecting itself. This was not the perfection of quantitative changes, but continuous qualitative changes. Countless tiny qualitative changes were crazily accumulating in every substance, every strand of energy, and every force in this world. Layer after layer of characteristics seemed to appear out of thin air, causing the creation world to become more and more complicated, and its level to become higher and higher. Generally speaking, the four-dimensional world that people knew of was created by superimposing a three-dimensional world on a timeline. By increasing the dimensionality of the three-dimensional water molecules and attaching the property of time to them, the water molecules would become four-dimensional. For example, when Qin Guang was in this plane, no matter if he moved forward or backward, he would have already left his original timeline when he wanted to move. With every step he took, countless copies of himself would appear in the same timeline, forming a long shadow. However, in the end, the materialization result was that he was still in the same place. He was clearly standing in the same place, but when he released his consciousness and wanted to see his back, he could use his gaze to cross the timeline and see himself after a certain period of time. However, the dimension of the creation world was quickly thrown out of the four-dimensional level and continued to move towards the next stage. If the entire creation world was completely closed, the so-called time would have lost its meaning. In the conventional imagination of humans, the five-dimensional space was formed by countless axis-shaped four-dimensional spaces intertwined together. Each four-dimensional time axis corresponded to a possibility. If there really was a creature that could live in this dimension, then he might be a 3-year-old child in one moment, and in the next moment, due to some needs, he would cross over to the age of 80 to eat breakfast, but in the next moment he would return to the age of 10 to attend a primary school class. However, such a five-dimensional creature was obviously not continuous and broken. His life logic was chaotic and his worldview was also broken. This was not a complete creature. However, the current Qin Guang existed in this world that was rising from the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension, and would continue to rise to the next level. In a sense, he was everywhere at this time. Just like folding a piece of paper, 2 points in the two-dimensional world that were extremely far away from each other could instantly overlap. At this time, Qin Guang abruptly existed in this creation world, where the realm and dimension were constantly rising. It was as if he was infinitely folded and replicated in every corner of the creation world. There was only one him here, but there were also infinite him. This kind of infinite existence not only crossed space but also time and infinite possibilities. In a sense, although the universe where the Earth was located was incomparably huge, according to the law of conservation of mass and energy, before antimatter was really discovered and used, it could be regarded as the energy in the universe was constant and limited. However, the small world that Qin Guang was in now had infinite matter in a real sense and also infinite energy. This was difficult to understand. For example, there were 2 iron balls made of the same material. One was only the size of a ping pong, while the other was as huge as an aircraft carrier. However, the mass of the ping-pong-sized iron ball was far greater than that of the aircraft carrier. It was logically unreasonable and impossible, but this was an objective fact that could not be denied. As time passed, perhaps only a moment had passed, but it could also be thousands of years. Qin Guang finally sensed that the sky and the earth in the distance had completely closed. At this time his whole body shook and his body seemed to melt at this moment. However, he was able to raise his hand and see his palm. At this moment his own thinking became omniscient and omnipotent, and it was also broken down into every inch of the creation world. At the same time, an immeasurable amount of information emerged in his mind. He obviously did not deliberately look, but at this moment his eyes seemed to see every inch of the entire space in his eyes and remember it in his heart. His gaze was macroscopic and he could see the giant tree in the world, but at the same time it was microscopic and he could see every most basic particle. At this moment he could do whatever he wanted. The huge amount of information contained in the entire plane instantly rushed into his mind. If he was still a three-dimensional life, even if the level of science and technology reached the peak of the Earth's universe, it would still not be able to withstand such a huge amount of information. Even if it was just verbal information, if the weight was so large that it was infinite, then even information would have the weight to crush the universe. However, at this moment he was in this plane and his whole body was assimilated with the plane. After his rebirth, his body structure looked like a human, but in fact he had already completely integrated the heavenly Holy Grail into his body. At this moment he could understand that he was a part of the heavenly Holy Grail, but the heavenly Holy Grail could also be understood as a part of his body. He was in the world within the cup, but the world within the cup was also in his body. This information was originally a part of his body. He withstood this huge amount of information, and began to see through the nature of this newly born creation world bit by bit. Suddenly he vaguely heard a resentful and unwilling roar. He did not know where this roar came from, but it resounded in every corner of the creation world. The roar seemed very resentful and unwilling, dull and distant, and it was filled with extremely complicated emotions. Qin Guang raised his head and looked ahead. In this creation world, other than himself, the other thing that had a real form was, of course, this 9-story tree of unknown origin. No, the origin of this giant tree was very clear and it was undoubtedly drawn by him, but the subsequent changes were unexpected. There was no doubt that the roar came from the giant tree. This was very magical. My random drawing inexplicably formed this tree, and then this tree should be the culprit that caused the entire creation world to evolve on its own. But in the end, the tree developed feelings and was actually angry because it was trapped in this creation world. Why did this matter become more and more incomprehensible the more he thought about it? Qin Guang calmed down again and began to decipher the roar of this tree in his heart. He did not really hear any sound. This roar came from his own omniscient and omnipotent perception. If he really only listened, he was afraid that he would not hear anything. After a long time, he finally finished deciphering the huge, complicated and extremely high-level information contained in the roar, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. Although he did not know what exactly happened, this tree turned out to be an old acquaintance. This was the deer cry fruit that he had not seen for a long time. After she disappeared from Cloud City, he did not know where she went, nor did he know what she was busy with. But now it seemed that what she did was definitely not a good thing. Otherwise she would not have ignored him and would not have roared angrily because she was trapped here. Qin Guang tried to use his own consciousness to actively communicate with the other party, but he failed. Although they were on the same plane and stood in the same dimension, there was a break in the level of consciousness of both parties, and they could not directly communicate. In addition, Qin Guang also realized that Deer Cry did not seem to be able to see him at all, nor did she know that he was standing here. At this time she was still angry at herself for being trapped here for no reason. Qin Guang vaguely understood that even though the 9-story giant tree was the foundation that caused the evolution of the plane of the world of creation, the authority of the tree itself did not seem to be as high as the soul of the main body of the Holy Grail. Deer Cry, who had transformed into a giant tree, was completely obscured by the incomparably huge data flow in the world of creation. After a while, the rumbling sound of impact came from the position of the giant tree again. It should be Deer Cry trying to break free from inside. But obviously she could only do so in vain. The level of everything in this world of creation was too high, even higher than the endless divine realm. Qin Guang himself was in the Holy Grail and the Holy Grail was in his body. At the same time he was in this world of creation and the world of creation was in his own body. This situation of overlapping and merging allowed him to instantly obtain and absorb all the information in the world of creation, and cast his gaze and consciousness anywhere. His behavior was similar to the primordial spirit leaving the body in Xianxia novels, but at a higher level, because the time in the world of creation at this time seemed to be intertwined chaotically and disorderly. Qin Guang's thoughts not only crossed space but also crossed time at any time and place. Of course, if one had a strong enough idea and consciousness and could understand the nature of the world of creation at this time, one could find the law from this disorderly intertwining, and then everything would be orderly. In short, he could let his thoughts wander now, but Deer Cry couldn't. Qin Guang didn't have any intention of saving her at this moment. He couldn't even get close to her, he could only take a look. After waiting for an unknown period of time, Qin Guang suddenly felt a little bloated in his stomach. That's right, there was again a very familiar feeling. The first time in the slaughtering world he let out a colorful fart. Later, after slaughtering the 4 deity emperors of the 4 deities temple for the first time in the true martial realm, he filtered their energy, leaving behind some inexplicable energy. Later, in the transitional space, he fought with Yu Ting and the other deity emperors, as well as one hand of the master god of chaos. At that time he absorbed and filtered the energy of nearly 1,000 deity emperors, including Yu Ting, as well as the energy that was dispersed in the air after the sacrifice of more than 3 million Life God clan members. Before this, Qin Guang didn't know what he had filtered and what was left in his body. He thought that after he came back to life, the inexplicable matter that was left behind should have disappeared long ago, but now it seemed that he was wrong. This kind of energy obviously had the characteristics of crossing time and space, and its dimension was even comparable to the world of creation. The existence of this matter was simply the truth. It didn't need to exist in reality, and it didn't need to be visible or tangible. It only needed to clearly tell others that it existed forever and would never be obliterated, and that it existed along with another existence. Perhaps it was just a sentence, but it was just that unreasonable. Previously, even Qin Guang's body had been changed and his soul was also reborn from nothingness, but the energy from before was so stubbornly and unyieldingly still in his body, and at this moment, it felt like it was about to be released. Puff! A vast and distant sound resounded through the world of creation, as if it was the murmur of the eternal Creator. If there were other living beings in this world, even if it was just a hamster with an undeveloped IQ, it would be able to transform into a powerhouse like a Lord God under the influence of the sound of the great Tao. Qin Guang silently raised his hand and pinched his nose. So do I have to release such high-end technology through farting at such a serious time? Without needing to turn around, Qin Guang only needed to release his consciousness to see the strange energy that was emerging from behind him. Green smoke was rising from where the chrysanthemum was blooming, cough cough. After this energy dissipated, it was evenly distributed to every part of the entire plane at an extremely fast speed, and Qin Guang could see all of this. The world of creation was originally of a very high level, and after integrating this energy, it actually rose to another level. Not only that, but the 9-story giant tree also changed at the same time. Looking at the new fruits on the giant tree, there were even many familiar faces on these fruits. It was actually Yu Ting Bafong Vesini, the Protoss whose projections had died in the world in the cup. Qin Guang suddenly understood. So that's how it is. So Lu Ming was caught in his own trap? If the gods in the divine realm knew that the most noble principal will in their eyes had actually turned into a spy in order to plot against him, forged Azure's memory, and pretended to be her best friend to rush into the heavenly Holy Grail. Now that she had been captured by him, he really didn't know how they would feel. As for the origin of the energy that he had just dissipated, it was not difficult to understand. This was the highest law controlled by the principal will of the divine realm. In order to let the gods' projections descend into the world in the cup, the principal will divided its own power and laws, and attached them to the gods' projections to protect their projections from crossing the barrier. But when the gods' projections died in the world in the cup, these powers that should have returned to the divine realm were captured by him. So, the source of the whole thing was that Azure and I gave up the divine spark together, gave up the memory of the divine realm and carried out this plan. Especially myself, I simply reincarnated from zero to earth. The purpose was to deceive everyone, to lure the principal will to descend, and then to pry into the root of the principal will. I don't remember anything, so the principal will can't pry into my memory. This plan even deceived me, and Azure only knew all kinds of specious things, telling me to pray for my own good, and let everything be controlled by the laws that evolved on their own in the heavenly Holy Grail. The fundamental purpose was to capture this will and its power. After thinking all this through, when Qin Guang looked at the giant tree again, his mood was very different from before. It seems that I have to personally compose a sad song for the gods. Chapter 1302. So, do I have to kill all the gods in the endless divine realm in this world within the cup? Would that be too heartless? Too cruel? No, since humans were like ants and livestock in the hearts of the gods, the life and death of humans did not matter at all. On the other hand, from the perspective of humans, it seemed that there was no need for him to care about the lives of the gods, just like how a beast would not care about the lives of humans who stood at the top of the food chain on Earth. When a tiger was hungry and happened to have an unarmed person fall in front of it, would the tiger consider whether the person would feel pain when it bit him? Would the tiger think that he was cruel? No way. After a long time, Qin Guang finally finished this long, special and unprecedented colorful fart. Although he released some inexplicable things that he did not know what they were made of, there was still a sense of comfort that made him want to moan. He sniffed quietly. Thank God there was no stench that he was worried about. This special energy probably only appeared in a more unorthodox way, but in fact, it was still quite pure and high-level energy. It was not really polluted like the excrement of ordinary people. It's time to leave, Qin Guang thought. Now that he was the spirit of the Holy Grail, he no longer needed to summon the Holy Grail to teleport him out like before. Instead, he could control it with his mind. He took a deep breath and began to loudly recite the password that appeared in his heart. 3, 2, Go. Not knowing how many times he recited the password in his heart, Qin Guang found that the scene in front of him did not change at all. He was still near the center of the world of creation, and in front of him was still the lush, illusory 9-story giant tree that was covered with the faces of the gods. A bad feeling welled up in Qin Guang's heart. Could it be that I'm trapped here and can't get out? Others might not believe it, but there's a big shot trapped in my body and can't get out. This was very illogical, but it was the truth. Qin Guang looked ahead with a constipated expression. Now that the creation world had completed its evolution, the structure of the entire plane was extremely stable, but a large amount of information was constantly rushing into his mind. During this period of time, other life forms had begun to evolve on the ground of the world of creation. Buds suddenly sprouted from the ground, turning into green grass that swayed in the breeze. The buds were dotted with colorful flowers from time to time. Black, white, red, and green bugs appeared on the flowers. Then these bugs flew randomly and floated to various places in the world of creation, landing on the ground very casually. Every time a bug landed on the ground, a variety of small plants would once again grow on the bare ground. During this whole process of change, the nature of the world of creation did not continue to advance. The level of this plane should have reached the peak that the heavenly Holy Grail and Qin Guang himself could understand and touched the ceiling. Everything that was born in the world of creation now was not a change in the rules, but a natural derivative that was born after the integration of the rules and the principles of the plane. Just like the evolution of the Earth's universe after tens of billions of years after the Big Bang of creation, the universe slowly gave birth to stars, planets, and other completely different celestial bodies from nothingness, and various different civilizations were born in the celestial bodies. In the process of the entropy change of the entire universe, the core rules did not undergo fundamental changes, but various particles floating in the universe would always follow the footsteps of time and gather together, forming celestial bodies, breeding life and incubating civilizations. At this time, the world of creation where Qin Guang was in looked much simpler than the universe on the surface. There were even no celestial bodies in this space, only heaven and earth and the tree in the middle. Now all kinds of plants and animals were rapidly evolving. However, he knew that things were not as simple as they seemed on the surface. Being omniscient and omnipotent, he could specify his thoughts to the particle level of every magnitude in the world of creation. For example, there was a drop of dew hanging on the leaves of the grass that was swaying in the wind right below him. The dew was, of course, composed of countless water molecules. But above the water molecules, there were countless civilizations being born and destroyed. The whole drop of dew was a complete universe. The whole drop of dew combined with the power of the world was a universe. The water drop universe was different from the Earth's universe. All celestial bodies could shine, and all celestial bodies had a structure of one big and two small. In other words, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom formed a super-small galaxy. Countless super-small galaxies gathered together to form a universe. Moreover, the distance between all the galaxies was exactly the same. The civilization born from such a unique universe was naturally completely different from the Earth's universe. However, these civilizations did not know that the planet they lived on was also an entire universe, and even the bodies of these creatures were also countless universes. Under the rules of the world of creation, every magnitude in this plane had a complete universe structure, layer by layer, and it was endless. Even the initial particles that were born in this plane could also be divided. This was a truly infinite plane with endless universes, and each of them was complete. If Qin Guang wanted, he could even let himself be thrown into any level of the universe at will and enjoy a complete life. In this plane he had true eternity. If it was not for the fact that he still maintained his human characteristics and still cared about his family and friends outside, Qin Guang estimated that he would not be able to resist the temptation of eternal life. "I can't get out, I'm so anxious," he silently complained in his heart. The world on the ground below was still changing. The life levels of various animals and plants were getting higher and higher, and the structure was getting more and more complex. Finally, the first intelligent life was suddenly born on the ground below, indicating that the world of creation had entered the next milestone at an extremely fast speed. This was a life form that Qin Guang had never imagined before. This intelligent life had an extremely fast speed of evolution. From the beginning of its birth, it adapted to the various rules of this plane at an extremely fast speed, and continued to expand and extend its influence, allowing its life to cross dimensions. It was like a worm with an extremely long body, and it could cross an extremely long distance in the three-dimensional dimension. However, at this time in Qin Guang's eyes, it was a complete sphere. It far surpassed the three-dimensional, then surpassed the four-dimensional, and was still moving towards a higher dimension. It did not take long for this intelligent life to become the second ubiquitous life in the world of creation after Qin Guang. This was an extremely confusing feeling. Simple vision could not adapt to this plane at all, and the eyes would only be deceived. If this life could enter the Earth's universe, it would probably be able to conquer the universe in an instant. However, Qin Guang knew that its level should not be higher than his. The reason was very simple. He could see it, but it could not sense his existence. If it wanted to see him, it had to reach the same dimension as him. However, this was obviously impossible because everything in this universe was infinite, and the difference between it and his own dimension was also infinite. However, Qin Guang had a glimmer of understanding in his heart from observing the evolution of this multidimensional creature. When he tried to increase his own dimension, his entire consciousness finally abruptly left the world of creation and appeared in the void in the cup outside. From the outside, the newly born world of creation was indeed a standard sphere, floating quietly at the top, even higher than the realm of life in the Earth's universe. Not only that, the height difference between the world of creation and the plane represented by the two special worlds seemed to be only a little, as if it could be crossed in one step. But Qin Guang knew that this distance was also infinite. Then what should I do if I want to go back? While trying to fly in the direction of the world of creation, feeling the real legendary mountain that could run a horse to death, Qin Guang muttered in his heart. However, he quickly withdrew this thought because he strangely found that he could still see everything in the world of creation. Impossible. I've clearly come out. No, in a sense, what came out was not the whole of me, only the me at the moment when I was about to leave. Qin Guang suddenly realized that in the world of creation, under the intertwining of infinite dimensions, infinite bodies and souls were also born, and what left was only a certain cross-section. If infinity was equal to the number n, then there was now a total of n-1 of himself left in the world of creation. Infinite minus 1 was actually still infinite. However, the Qin Guang in the world of creation did not exist apart from his main body. That was because the infinite Qin Guang in there had the characteristic of transcending time. Therefore, under the infinite layers of time and space, the Qin Guang was not separated. Instead, he was completely one and had unified thoughts. At this time he existed in the void in the cup, but at the same time he existed in the world of creation. Qin Guang turned his mind to the Earth's universe, only to find that a whole 5 years had passed on Earth in the blink of an eye. In these 5 years, earth-shaking changes had taken place on Earth, and in his body, there was a lot of special energy left behind by the death of the Protoss out of thin air. I'm really a high-end vacuum cleaner. The meaning of my existence is to suck the dust of Lu Ming. Chapter 1303. In the early stages of the game, the Protoss players had an overwhelming advantage over the human players due to their divine power system. However, in the past 5 years, under the leadership of the Heaven Division left behind by Qin Guang, the human players had made great progress. Although S-class players could not be said to be everywhere, there were already more than 10 S-class players in the Heaven Division. Xin Qin and Wu Miaowan, the two deputy ministers who were originally not very skilled in martial arts in the real world, rose rapidly after the disappearance of the minister. Their inner strength cultivation in the real world soared, and they quickly surpassed the skin strength stage and entered the next stage, the master realm. At the same time as their cultivation in the real world grew, the two of them also made rapid progress in the game. As the leaders of the Heaven Division, the two of them did not need to use public resources to fill their own pockets. The normal benefits alone were enough for them to continue to improve at a speed many times faster than ordinary players. The advancement of a player's identity was somewhat different from that of a martial artist. Although it still depended on talent and perception, it was more of a simple accumulation of quantity. The awakened ability was constantly instilled with reward points, and it could be steadily improved step by step. Of course, even if they were at the same level, there could still be a huge gap between the combat power of two players. The specific factors included the player's own personality, combat wisdom, willpower, and the different characteristics of different types of awakened abilities. For example, Xin Qin and Wu Miaowan were martial artists, and they were much stronger than ordinary players of the same level. Ever since they were young, they've been living a harsh life in martial arts. Although the two of them might seem ordinary before Qin, they're never weaklings in their bones. Otherwise, when Xianxia became the chairman of the Darts Association, the others would not have been so helpless. Apart from the True Force realm, there had never been a large space that pulled everyone together in the game. Instead, it was a small and medium-sized space with hundreds or thousands of people, with no more than 5,000 people participating. Most of the time, Xianxia and Wu Miaoan could only enjoy their ready-made team buffs. When they were lucky, the two of them could also gather a few Heaven Division members in the same mission, but most of the time they could only rely on themselves. However, the two of them carried the tokens left by their masters when they left the True Force realm. At critical moments, they could spend a large number of reward points to summon their masters to help them. Therefore, Xianxia and Wu Miaoan were invincible in the game missions. Although the two seniors Xianxia and Wu Miaoan were trapped in the True Force realm, after meeting Qin, their memories were awakened by Qin, and they became mavericks in the True Force realm. Due to the loophole operation of the Endless Divine Realm's original will, the True Martial Realm, a large plane that was originally independent of the game system, became entangled with the small mission spaces that were newly created by other game systems. The two masters in the True Martial Realm who had reached the peak of the Aborigines were able to extract their independent consciousnesses and wander out of the True Martial Realm through the loophole between planes. However, the difference between their consciousness and the Holy Grail's void in the cup was too great. Xianxia and Wu Miaoan had to activate the keepsakes for the two of them to find the correct direction based on the coordinates. Otherwise, they would definitely get lost in a certain dimensional layer constructed by the void in the cup. In short, the duo formed by the Deputy Minister of Heaven rose to power rapidly. They advanced to Class S almost at the same time as 10 other Grandmaster Realm experts, including Aunt May. They became the pillars of the human players. All the Realm S players formed the pinnacle of the pyramid of human players, and they were known as the Ultimate Masters. Of course, there was another realm above the Ultimate Masters that no one had ever stepped into, and they were known as the Ultimate Masters. Of course, there was another realm above the Ultimate Masters that no one had ever stepped into, and they were known as the Ultimate Masters. There was only one name on the list of the Ultimate Masters, Qin. When he realized this, Qin curled his lips. You guys are too simple-minded. The Ultimate Master shouldn't be me but Wen. As for me, sorry, I'm on a different level than you guys. Everyone's styles are different. Isn't it funny to put you guys on the same level as me? Of course, there was a group of outliers among the top human players. They didn't belong to any of the official organizations. They were either loners or formed their own teams. Typical examples were the students from Gokyo University, Tang Ying and Wu Tong's team, Qinguang Group's 4 great warriors, Zhou Jingxi and her lab members, Jiang Yage and Jin Shiyue's team, and Lu Fei and Chu Zijin who formed their own teams. Of course, in the game each of them had a different code name and they even gave their respective teams different names. However, no one knew who they were in real life. Although Sun Xiaoxuan, Lin Jingwei, and the others had formed a mutual aid society within the school, they hadn't expanded too quickly. Even the members of the Mutual Aid Society had only formed an alliance in the real world under the coordination of a few of them. The chances of them meeting each other in the game were not high. Even if they met members of the Gokyo University Mutual Aid Society in the game, they would only form a temporary team. Others only knew that they were stronger members of the Mutual Aid Society, but they didn't know their status in the Mutual Aid Society. In addition, there were a few teams that were very different from the others. They were the 7 Grade A powerhouses from the beginning. After experiencing the initial mysteries, these 7 strongest people gradually took the initiative to unveil their mysterious veil in front of the world. One of the old men formed a team with 2 people and recruited a lot of people in the game. They even built a large team based on the foundation of the small team. There was also a young man who looked like a student who was particularly unconventional. He treated people coldly in the game, but he was extremely strong. Not only did he lead the other human players in every mission, but he could even suppress the Protoss. The last 3 people were even more amazing. One of them could control time. Just the type of ability was enough to scare people. At the very least, there was no one else in the entire human race who had such a unique ability. Another person could turn his body into rubber. He even imitated the male protagonist of a real-life anime and developed his rubberization ability to the extreme. The third person wielded a godly bow. It was said to be called the Wrath of the Elven King. It had extraordinary power and could hit anything it pointed at. The team formed by these three women could be said to be invincible. They were the first human team to reach Grade S at the same time. On the team ranking stone tablet in the center of Cloud City, the team formed by these three people named Dancing in the Sky was impressively ranked second. As for the nameless team that always occupied the first position on the stone tablet, although everyone knew about them, no one had ever seen the members of this team. According to many people's guesses, the nameless squadron might be referring to the all-round Qin Guang. Although he had disappeared, no one thought that he was dead. Everyone firmly believed that he must be hiding somewhere, observing and accumulating his strength. These people were the wealth that Qin Guang had left for mankind. Of course, there was no shortage of geniuses among the 7 billion people in the world. In the long history of mankind, it was precisely the emergence of one genius after another that drove the progress of history. Today, in the environment of the explosion of human technology in the past 100 years, along with the popularization of education, geniuses emerged one after another. Therefore, in addition to these people who were spurred on by the influence of Qin Guang, there were also many other top players all over the world who were running solo or forming teams. They had become the spearhead of mankind. The names of these people might not be known, but through the ranking stone tablet in Cloud City, the names of the teams and teams could be known. Under the leadership of the many top players on the list, the humans of Earth had slowly become an equal match from being completely suppressed by the Protoss at the beginning. One by one, the players conquered the world in a cup. When Qin Guang was monitoring the past, he finally realized that the victory of mankind was actually very important to him. Not every Protoss who died in the game space could leave behind the mysterious energy in the colorful fart. There were two prerequisites for obtaining the rule power controlled by the mixed origin will in the Protoss projection. Either these Protoss had personally died in the hands of Qin Guang, or the humans of Earth had to achieve the final victory in the mission space. If the Protoss were allowed to complete the game mission before the humans, or snatch away the only verification item, although the human players could still survive, they would be judged to have failed the alignment. After the alignment failed, even if there were Protoss projections who died in this game space, the energy of the origin will would still be taken away. But if the humans of Earth won, the energy of the origin will attached to the Protoss projection would be intercepted by the mixed rule of the real world and the Earth's universe when it tried to escape. Understanding this fact, Qin Guang breathed a long sigh of relief. Thank God the old man had done so much in the past, it was not for nothing. Although in his heart he thought that people should contribute when they had money and status. It was a fearless spirit of dedication and he didn't ask for anything in return, but now that it was also of great benefit to him, of course he felt more comfortable. For example, he had done so much for Tangshan City recently. In his observation he found that in terms of geographical division, the number of players in Tangshan City was far more than the average third-level city, and the strength of these players was also more tyrannical. The overall strength of the players in Tangshan City, which had a total population of no more than 3 million, was only slightly weaker than that of Wujing City. This was simply incredible. But when Qin Guang focused his attention on the Tangshan Industrial Wastewater Treatment Plant, he knew the reason. In the industrial plant, his statue of the Lord of the Earth was still standing, and it had not been removed because of feudal superstition or anything. On the statue of the Lord of the Earth, there were hundreds of thousands of threads of faith connecting various places in Tangshan City. This meant that the things he did for Tangshan City were remembered by the local people, and because the rumors were very accurate, many people would go to see the statue of the Lord of the Earth when they had nothing to do. As a result, the people in this place were particularly devout and entangled with his threads of fate. The selection and birth rate of players were higher, and after becoming players, these people's combat power in the game system was far superior to that of ordinary places. Qin Guang pondered, wondering if he should call in a dream and ask the guy who put up the statue of the Lord of the Earth to do more, so that in the future, wherever the Morning Light Environmental Protection Plant opened, his statue would be there. Once this idea came up, it could not be suppressed. Now Qin Guang's real body could not return for a while, but it would not be a problem for him to call in a dream. Alas, I am still alive and well, but I can only communicate with others in a dream. This feels very awkward. Speaking of which, should I look for Jiang Yage, Sister Lu Fei, or Teacher Zhou to have an erotic dream? Cough cough, as he was complaining there was a sudden change on earth. Qin Guang's mouth was wide open and he was speechless for a long time. Unexpectedly, after 5 years on earth, what he had been worried about had finally happened. Lu Xiaoyang, the third dog of Tianguang Agency, had transformed in his own office. Yes, his ability was to transform into Cerberus, but that was, after all, an ability in the game. Even if third dog had become a top S-level player in the game, he was still just an ordinary guy in real life. There was only one explanation for what was happening to him now. The game system had completely penetrated into reality, and humans on Earth were about to awaken. Was this the third evolution of humans? Qin Guang thought silently, should I stop it? No, how can I stop it? On Earth, in the vice president's office on the 15th floor of the Lida building, the third dog, Lu Xiaoyang, silently looked at the computer monitor that had been burned to ashes. He was quite confused. Why did I transform without saying a word? Besides, when I transformed in the game I didn't want to eat bones. My current mentality is very dangerous. He stretched out a paw and carefully poked at the phone that had fallen to the ground with his fingertip. I really want to order ugly dumpling takeout. Please give me 10 portions of bone soup. I want the bones. Chapter 1304. As the first player in the world to awaken in real life, Lu Xiaoyang should have felt very honored, but he was not happy at all. The awakened ability in the game had combined with the real world. Apart from the characteristics of his ability itself, there were also many personal traits that were unique to the real world, such as his habit of chewing bones. This habit was very strong. It was comparable to the human race's instinct to reproduce, and he could not get rid of it. As the deputy general manager of the Tianguang group, Lu Xiaoyang, who was second only to one person and above tens of thousands of people at this moment, he felt like 10,000 alpacas were galloping in his heart. I am the noble Cerberus of hell. I am a super mythical beast with 3 heads that can spit out flaming storm, frost ambush and darkness curtain. Why did I fall in love with chewing bones? How could a noble being like the Cerberus be infected with the bad habits of a rural dog? No, I must hold on. I will not eat bones even if you beat me to death. I, Lu Xiaoyang, have an annual income of 7 figures, a house in the second ring road of the city and a car at home. I will be a big shot in the outside world. I will not give up my dignity. Even if I die, I will not give in. Don't you want to try it? Listen to me, I have never eaten anything so delicious in my life. Try it. Try it. Don't you think the soup is very fragrant? Listen to the sound of the bone marrow gurgling. Oh my god, this fragrance is killing me. Really, all my taste buds feel like they're dancing. Yu Hong, Fong Tianyu and Suli looked at Lu Xiaoyang with grief and sympathy in their eyes. Buttface was holding the big bone rod that was about to break. There was no soup on it nor any fragrant bone marrow. He had already sucked it dry. This big bone rod should have been licked until it was white, but he did not notice it and even tried to share it with others. He was terminally ill. In addition, there were more than 30 big bone sticks placed on the side of the dining table. He was afraid that the restaurant's stock of this dish today was going to be cleaned up by him. Finally, Buttface put down the bone in his hand, wiped his mouth and burped loudly. This was the end of his gluttony for the day. Fong Tianyu looked at Lu Xiaoyang sympathetically. I say, have you really awakened? I don't think so. It must be the awakening of some shameful multiple personality in your heart. That's why you like to gnaw on bones. Didn't the boss give you the nickname Dog 3? He must have seen that you were a husky in your previous life. Lu Xiaoyang gritted his teeth. Shut up. Believe it or not, I will bite you to death. Yu Hong coughed lightly to get the two of them to behave themselves. Otherwise they might start fighting in the private room. Xiao Lu, the 4 of us are all S rank in the game, so why did you awaken first? Logically speaking, the 4 of us should be synchronized. Our abilities in the game are comparable to modern firearms. If we really bring these abilities into the real world, I'm afraid it will have a huge impact on the current society. Don't joke around. Lu Xiaoyang saw that the 3 of them did not believe him, so he simply raised his right hand. With a flash of light, his right hand turned into a crimson furry claw in front of everyone. The crimson furry claw was surging with bright red smoke, and hellish magma flowed through the cracks in the rocks above it. The temperature of the whole room suddenly rose by a few degrees, making the air-conditioned room feel like a boiler. Yu Hong and the other two had to believe him now. After Lu Xiaoyang withdrew his power, Suli said in confusion, but the three of us did not feel anything at all. Doc 3, what were the signs before you awakened? Lu Xiaoyang recalled for a while and said blankly, at that time I was looking at the business report in the office. I did not do anything else, nor did I have any warning signs. I was a little sleepy so I yawned. In the process of yawning I transformed and the air I blew out melted the monitor. Yu Hong asked, so you were in your human form a moment ago and in the next moment, you turned into a three-headed dog? Lu Xiaoyang nodded. Exactly. There were no signs at all. Fortunately I reacted quickly and did not transform completely. Otherwise when my real body appeared, I'm afraid that the floor of the office would collapse. The ordinary employees in the company would be so scared that they would wet their pants. Then why did you do that? Yu Hong and the other two were scratching their heads. Everyone knew that this was a big secret that could even shake the world, but they had no clue about it. After all, not every player was as calm as the four of them. Nowadays, the game system would reselect new players every time. It was hard to guarantee that there would not be people with extreme personalities. If such people were allowed to awaken their abilities and could use them in reality, it would only be a matter of time before they were seen by ordinary people, and it would cause chaos in the world. Fong Tianyu suggested, by the way, let's try to find a non-player to talk about the game and see if he has been reset. Then we will know, right? The other three rolled their eyes at him. Lu Xiaoyang shrugged. You're dreaming. Who can communicate with ordinary people? Who would want to be reset? That was another life, that was another magnificent world. Think of me, the three-headed dog of hell. Shut up. Look at what that is. Fong Tianyu suddenly lost control and pointed at the corner of the room. Yu Hong and Suli looked at each other. Something was wrong. Lu Xiaoyang looked in the direction of Fong Tianyu's finger. It was a common fire extinguisher, but Fong Tianyu looked at it with fear in his eyes. It was like a mouse seeing a cat or a mosquito seeing insecticide. Yu Hong said, could it be? That's right, I have awakened too. Fong Tianyu's hair suddenly ignited. The flames were extremely fierce. Unlike the three-headed dog of hell, Fong Tianyu's flame of the fire spirit was his strongest ability. When it was fully unleashed, it was extremely ferocious and pierced through the ceiling. At this moment the door of the room was suddenly opened. The waitress pushed the door open and entered. Dear guest, sorry to disturb you. Our shop is having an event today. Recharge. The four of them turned their heads to look at the waitress. The flames on Fong Tianyu's head were immediately retracted. The air froze for 5 seconds. The four of them recovered from their shock. The next moment their faces turned pale. They had just thought of finding a player to test the ordinary people. In the blink of an eye, Fong Tianyu had awakened and their plan was exposed. 4 S-level players had been reset at the same time. This was a huge blow to the human race. Well, if we say that we are magicians and that we were performing magic just now, would you believe us? As expected of Buttface, he reacted very quickly and started to talk nonsense at the first possible moment. In the void, Qin was also watching this scene. He curled his lips. Who would believe you? Do you think we are fools? Unexpectedly, the waitress came forward and looked at Fong Tianyu's hair carefully. Seeing nothing abnormal, she really believed him. How naive. After the waitress left, the four of them heaved a sigh of relief. They had finally gotten away with it. However, this didn't make sense. In the past, players would be reset even if they just mentioned it to others. Now they were caught red-handed. Even if she really believed in their nonsense with the harsh nature of the game system, the four of them should have been reset to have their memories tampered on the spot. Now they had somehow passed the test. In the void, Qin was also observing Earth and carefully sensing the rules of the universe on Earth. After a long time, Qin let out a long sigh. Things could no longer be reversed. The game system would no longer reset the players. This meant that the players were really going to enter Earth. As expected, the awakening of Lu Xiaoyang and Fong Tianyu was like the key to Pandora's box. One day later, almost all the S-level players around the world had awakened one after another. On the other side, Qin could no longer continue to pay attention to Earth. He was pulled into the next realm of the Azure Sky Cup. This time it was not a magical existence like the world of creation. Instead, he was asked to become the strongest water archmage in a magic plane. It seemed that the heavenly Holy Grail intended to let him come into contact with the power of God from now on. It wanted to complete his knowledge of elemental energy. By the time Qin Guang exhausted all his strength and came out of the heavenly Holy Grail, another 3 days had passed on Earth. In these 3 days, players from S level to E level had completed their awakening one after another. Mankind had ushered in a drastic change. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.